Thank you very much. Could I have apologies for absence, please?
We have apologies, Chairman, from Assembly Member Arnold, the Chair, and Assembly Member Eshalomi.
We have a great many visitors this morning. Can I welcome to the public gallery students from News Associates School of Journalism, students from the Middlesex University's BA course in Sociology and Social Policy, members of the Wimbledon Synagogue, St Lawrence University, upstate New York, St Martin's Academy, Tulse Hill. Welcome to you all. Can I provide an update on some recent Assembly activity? Last week we published 2 reports. The Transport Committee issued the findings of its investigation on motorcycle safety. The Mayor and members may be interested to know that motorcycles account for just 1% of the journeys made in London, yet 27% of people killed or seriously injured on London's roads are motorcyclists. The Health Committee published a report focusing on how to improve workplace health. We have a busy period in the run-up to the pre-election period, which the Mayor and members will know begins next Tuesday, the 27th of March. Before then, the Assembly is planning to issue reports on waste, cycling infrastructure, town centres, and in the aftermath of the fire at Grenfell Tower, a report looking at the cost of installing sprinklers in all of London's tall buildings. Declarations of interest. Would you please note the recommendation set out at item 2? Does any member have any other disclosable pecuniary interest or other relevant interest to declare this morning? Right. Thank you very much. Would you please agree the minutes of the London Assembly's Mayor's Question Time meeting held on the 22nd of February 2018 as an accurate record? Thank you very much. Would the Assembly please receive the Mayor's report covering the period from the 9th of February 2018 to the 8th of March 2018?
Agreed.
The Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report. There have been the following requests for inclusion within the Mayor's oral update. One from Assembly Member Pidgeon, an update on TfL's commitment to consider expansion of the Santander cycle hire scheme and future plans for the Thames cable car. From Assembly Member Berry, an update on London policing ethics and their consideration of facial recognition technologies. And from Assembly Member Dismore, an update on last week's emergency meeting of the London Stadium Safety Advisory Group. Mr. Mayor.
Good morning, Chair and Assembly members. Over the past 12 months, London has endured a series of horrific terrorist attacks. Westminster, London Bridge, Finsbury Park and Parsons Green. I know, as the London Assembly comes together today on the anniversary of the Westminster attack, that our thoughts are with the families of those who were killed, survivors, and everyone affected. We will never forget them or the bravery of our emergency services and first responders who ran towards danger whilst urging others to safety. And we'll never forget the courage of PC Keith Palmer, who paid the ultimate price while sacrificing Parliament. Today, we pay tribute to him and the other 4 lives lost due to the attack on the 22nd of March last year. Kurt Cochrane, Andrea Christia, Aisha Fraid, and Leslie Rhodes. Following consultation with bereaved families, survivors and others, I've announced plans to mark the anniversaries. The phrase London United will be projected onto Parliament today and then onto London Bridge, Finsbury Park and Parsons Green Tube Station. From today, the public can pay their respects and sign a digital book of hope here at City Hall and send messages using London United on social media, which will then be projected onto a map of London downstairs. I have this morning signed the Book of Hope, and I know some members want to do so later on today. This afternoon, I'll be attending a service of remembrance alongside the Commissioner of the Met Police, and also will visit Parliament Square to pay my respects. As we enter this period of remembrance and reflection, I know I speak for everyone here when I say we remain united as Londoners, united against terrorism, united in supporting the families and the survivors, and united in our hope for the future. Chair, as you've said, I've been asked to give 3 requests for oral updates. The first one from Assembly Member Berry on automatic facial recognition and the ethics panel. I reformed the London Police and Ethics Panel last year in order to help to maintain oversight of the work of the Met Police and ensure their activity is conducted to the highest ethical standard. The panel, which is chaired by the ethical policy expert Dr. Suzanne Shale, is independent of City Hall and the Met, designing their own work programme in consultation with me, my Office for Policing and Crime and the Commissioner. I've agreed with Dr. Shale that the use by the Met of automatic facial recognition should constitute their first piece of work, and the panel began this towards the end of 2017. The small-scale trials have seen facial recognition technology used 3 times by the Met, twice at the 2016 and 2017 Notting Hill Carnival, and once in late 2017 at the Remembrance Sunday ceremony at the Cenotaph. As with any new technology, it's right that we consider the benefits and risks in the round, which is why it's important to have trials, and why I'm sure you'll join me in welcoming the ethics panel's interest. It's important that the panel examines its use fully and presents general recommendations to me and the Commissioner on how digital technology can be used to keep the public safe, whilst also respecting their rights as citizens. In addition, the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Sophie Linden, has discussed this with the Commissioner at the MOPAC Met Oversight Board. The ethics panel have already held evidence sessions with the Met, the Biometrics, Surveillance, Camera and Information Commissioners, the Home Office, Liberty and Big Brother Watch. I understand the panel have been impressed with the level of engagement they've had from all sides. I expect, Chair, the panel to publish an interim report in the coming months with a full report later this year. I've also asked to give an oral update in relation to the Santander cycles and Thames cable car by Assemblymember Pigeon. With close to 10.5 million hires, 2017 was a record year for the cycle hire scheme, and that has continued into 2018 with the best ever January. As my transport strategy clearly sets out, I want to increase the use of Santander cycles and explore the potential of new models of cycle hire to reinforce it as an integral part of London's cycling infrastructure. My investment in new bikes shows how committed I am to the future of Santander cycles. They can even be seen on the front cover of the transport strategy. I was pleased that in partnership with Lambeth Council, we were able to expand the Santander cycle scheme to Brixton last month, where there are now 7 docking stations and 200 new Santander cycles. I've no doubt that the bikes will quickly become a familiar sight across Brixton, as they help tens of thousands more Londoners and visitors travel easily across the area. It's yet another example of how we've made cycling more accessible, helping to improve London's air quality and to tackle congestion. TfL will work with partners to further develop the cycle hire scheme. While there are no current plans to extend the network, TfL would certainly consider doing so if it was economically viable and there were sufficient benefits. TfL has demonstrated its ability to work with interested parties to find suitable funding packages and is ready to do so again. In the future of the cable car, TfL expects the Emirates airline to continue to cover operating costs and contribute towards its original construction costs over the next 5 years. In the longer term, TfL is open to all options. Chair, the third request for an oral update is from Assemblymember Dismore on West Ham. I understand that many West Ham fans have various concerns about the club and the way it's run, but the scenes we witnessed at the London Stadium on the 10th of March were a disgrace, and I condemn the mindless hooliganism of a small minority of people intent on disrupting the game. The safety and security of spectators and staff has to be the #1 priority. A full, detailed investigation is underway. Last week's Emergency Safety Advisory Group meeting sought to understand what happened and to identify improvements. The Safety Advisory Group recognised that the stewarding and security operation was stretched significantly by the unprecedented scale and volume of incidents. Initial investigations show an apparently planned and coordinated campaign of disruption. More than a dozen fights broke out in different parts of the ground between West Ham supporters at the same time. 26 different individuals tried to get onto the pitch, 22 were stopped by stewards, 4 were successful. There were 150 separate incidents, 50 public order offences and 40 assaults. CCTV footage clearly shows a coordinated move by a known group of individuals to the director's box resulted in the scenes we all witnessed. A former Upton Park steward, a middle-aged woman, was knocked to the ground and trampled by mindless thugs, suffering whiplash and concussion. Another ex-serviceman suffered severe bruising, protecting one of the pitch invaders from the blows and kicks of other West Ham fans. 6 of the 56 persons of interest have previously served banning orders at the London Stadium or Upton Park. I understand work is underway to identify, prosecute and ban all those responsible for violence and disorder at the match. I'd like to publicly thank the stewards and security staff for their efforts and restraint under the most intense provocation. With oversight from the Safety Advisory Group, measures will be taken to further improve the security regime so it's better placed to respond should similar incidents occur again. This will include increasing the level of stewarding, enhancing pitch security and a significantly larger police presence at the next match. Under the contracts signed by the previous mayor, these costs fall onto the London taxpayer, despite them being the result of the behaviour of some West Ham supporters. While I've called on the operator to deliver the best possible stewarding at the venue, I've also called on the owners of West Ham to take decisive action to permanently remove those intent on violence from attending matches and to take responsibility for managing the appalling behaviour of a small minority of its followers. In the days after the match, I received letters from Baroness Brady claiming there had been a 15% cut in safety and security expenditure and that the resources available to the venue safety team at the Burnley match were inadequate. Having received reports from senior officials, I'm advised there has been no requirement to reduce stewarding and security spending during the season. This is judged on a match-by-match basis. I am advised, in fact, that the cost of stewarding and security for the Burnley game on the 10th of March was in line with the agreed standard for Category A games and was actually similar to the Chelsea game, a much higher risk fixture. I've called on those that run West Ham to focus on building better relations with their supporters and tackling those intent on violence. The overwhelming majority of West Ham supporters and the London taxpayer deserve much better.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Assembly Member Dismore.
That very comprehensive report about West Ham. Can you tell us how much extra the taxpayer is going to have to find as a result of these additional security measures? Was there any intelligence anticipating trouble beforehand? Because it does seem like we could be drifting back to the old days. And bearing in mind that last year West Ham cost the taxpayer over £1 million net in terms of policing, will you redouble your efforts to try and persuade West Ham to make a contribution and also approach the government to try and get them to agree that football clubs should pay the full cost of policing their matches, bearing in mind that last year it cost London a net £7 million, plus £3 million for BTP, £10 million in total?
Well, can I thank you for your question, and you've been lobbying on this issue for some time now. We have 5 Premier League clubs in London, and the cost of policing those 5 games is huge, particularly in the context of the huge cuts the Met Police has faced over the last 7 years. The agreement reached between the Mayor and West Ham and in the contracts previously signed mean that the cost of the additional security, the cost of additional policing falls on the taxpayer, not on West Ham. I'm due to meet the Vice Chairman of West Ham, Baroness Brady, shortly. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss commercial issues and how we go forward, but clearly one of the issues we'll be raising is security and safety and the additional costs. And clearly one of the issues I'll be raising is what appears to be a disproportionate cost on the taxpayer for West Ham having the privilege of playing at the London Stadium.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Boff.
Mr. Mayor, Karen Brady, who is the Vice Chairman of West Ham United, wrote to you on the 3rd of January 2017 requesting a meeting. Did you meet Karen Brady as a result of that request?
We're meeting shortly.
Did you meet her as a result of that request on the 3rd of January 2017?
There's a variety of reasons why I'm meeting. If you'll remember, when the Moore-Stevens report was published, we then decided to pursue a commercial strategy for the stadium. And the best thing was to meet with West Ham, the owners, once we'd made progress on the commercial strategy. And that's why the meeting's been scheduled for next week.
Okay. On the 20th of September, you wrote to Karen Brady and suggested that, and welcomed her suggestion of a meeting, and you asked your office to schedule a conversation later in that year. Did you have that conversation, Mr. Mayor?
Personally, no, but my officials meet regularly with those who run West Ham. The stadium operators meet regularly, E20 meet regularly, and City Hall staff regularly speak with those who run West Ham. Personally, I've not met with the owners, the chairman or the vice chairman of West Ham, but I look forward to making progress next week.
In the time of the previous chair of the LLDCs, at the time we had the previous chair of the LLDC, we quizzed him yesterday at Budget Committee and asked him when he had met you over that period of his 6 months tenure. And he said, apart from an introductory meeting when you first became mayor, you'd never had a meeting with the chair of the LLDC. Is that correct?
I couldn't recall the times I've met him, but I'm happy to go and look at the diary and drop you a note as to how many times I've met him. I couldn't tell you.
Well, according to him, you never did apart from that first introductory meeting. Mr. Mayor, the complaints about stewarding have been around for quite a while, haven't they?
Well, I think the complaints about the stewarding have been around as long as the contract signed by the previous mayor was signed with the owners. And I think the key thing is to realise that these are the consequences of contracts signed between West Ham United and those that run the stadium, but also contracts between those that run the stadium and the stadium operators as well. And what we're trying to do, post Moore-Stevens, is to come up with a commercial strategy that doesn't mean that the taxpayer is facing a massive bill over the next 99 years, but we can reach a resolution that works for West Ham, works for the taxpayer, but also works for those those of us who want to see that stadium as a hub for global events other than just Premier League football.
So, in your words, I don't want to use your words too much, but
what we'd like to do is to resolve things amicably. But clearly, if you've got one party saying the contract is legally binding and airtight and think they've got a great deal and don't think they should pay any more, it's very difficult. We're trying to make sure we can have a resolution that works for West Ham. It's really important they are happy where they are, that works for the taxpayer, but also works for those of us who want to see the stadium used for events other than Premier League football.
So, that's a lot of concern. When did you last meet the chair of the LLDC to discuss those concerns?
Well, my team meet with them regularly. As recently as yesterday, I understand the Chief of Staff was at a meeting with E20. We have regular conversations with them in relation
Mayor,
to...
Thank you. I'm sure there are communications taking place between some of your team. When did you meet with them?
Again, I can send you a note from my diary when I last met with them. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Have you met them 10 times?
Why don't I drop you a note to be precise rather than guessing, as is your favourite way of doing stuff. Let me give you a precise answer.
Less than 10 times?
I couldn't tell you.
You couldn't tell me. Is it more than one time?
The chair or the chief executive?
The chair of the LLDC?
I couldn't tell you.
You don't know whether or not you've met them?
No.
You don't know whether or not you've met the chair of the LLDC, which is a major deliverer of regeneration in the East End?
I'm very happy to write you and copy the Assembly in exact number of times I've met with the relevant people you have asked about.
Mr. Mayor, as you are so concerned, why would it be that you haven't responded to repeated requests by West Ham to meet with you to address the issue of the poor relationship between that company and E20, the LLDC? Why haven't you taken personal control until we have a riot?
Well, there's got to be a purpose for the meeting, and the purpose for the meeting is to discuss the commercial strategy for the stadium going forward and what we can do to increase the revenue of the stadium, to address the concerns that West Ham have, but also to address some of the issues that have been raised in the past. That's one of the reasons why we've asked for a commercial strategy to be written up. That includes things like use of the stadium when it's not used for football. That includes things like reconfiguring the seating arrangements. That includes things like ensuring we can get payment for sponsorship around the
That's
football
good,
matches.
Mr. Mayor, but it's
And
taken a year and a half, virtually a year and 3 months.
Chair, the question was
for
asked,
you
and I've
to-
interrupted during my answer, and
Yeah.
so, you know.
That's the answer.
Well, no, so Chair, am I being invited to finish my answer? I'm confused here.
I thought...
The subject matter
Well, I was interrupted, so...
is fascinating. When did you're meeting West Ham soon? When was that meeting organised, Mr. Mayor? When did you arrange that? Was it before the riot or after the riot?
I couldn't tell you when it was arranged, but I answered at previous Mayor's question time that our offices were in contact, and I think the Assembly Member Boff, when answering a question to me, I think 5 questions ago, mentioned the fact that my offices had been in contact with them to organise the meeting. I can't tell you who spoke to who and when to organise the meeting. What I can tell you is that I'm due to meet with the Vice Chairman shortly. I'm here to speak on behalf of Londoners and try and get a good deal for Londoners with West Ham, not speaking on behalf of the Vice Chairman.
Yes. So I'm only happy for you to speak to Londoners, but you've been particularly silent with regard to requests to meet the major tenant of the London Stadium. Why haven't you met them?
Well, Chairman, as I was answering, I did get to finish the end of my answer. So after the Moore Stevens report, we asked for a commercial strategy to be undertaken. That's not been completed yet, and so no point in meeting just for a cup of tea and biscuits and a photograph. The idea is to have a purpose for the meeting. Once the commercial strategy was advanced, we're in a position to speak to the Vice Chairman and others behind West Ham. Separately, there is a court case taking place and other threats being made by West Ham. And in addition, there is alternative dispute resolution. But it's important to have meetings for a purpose, and hopefully there'll be a purpose behind the meeting next week.
You, Mr. Mayor, may think it's about having a cup of tea and biscuits. For those people who were fearing for their lives during the riot, it's a much more important subject. And they, Mr. Mayor, are looking for your personal attention and have been for some time. Thank you.
Well, Chair, that question was my response. I think the Assembly Member was trying to seek, and I'll advise him how to ask questions, but he was asking my response to that. And I think it's disgraceful that this Assembly Member trying to make political points about a very serious issue about the safety and stewarding of a Premier League cane, where we've heard from my opening statement,
Mr.
members
Mayor,
of staff
I've met
were
with
injured
Karen
as a
Brady
consequence
more
of the
than you
behaviour of a
have.
small number of fans. And only this Assembly Member would seek to hold me responsible for the behaviour of those hooligans. I am meeting the Vice Chairman next week. One of the things I'll be raising with her and those who own West Ham is how they'll take action to make sure this small minority aren't risking the safety of other users of that stadium.
Assembly Member Prince.
Mr Mayor, you said that there was a need to have a reason for the meeting. That's why you've taken as long as you have to have this meeting with Karen Brady. But earlier you said that there was a desperate need, and has been a desperate need, for West Ham to improve its relations with the LLDC. Did you not think it would be appropriate for you to have a meeting with West Ham to try and improve those relations and understand what the issues were around why there's such a bad relationship?
There's regular contact between City Hall and West Ham, between LLDC and West Ham. Those communications continue. There are regular meetings, for example, as I referred to and asked a question from Assemblyman Dismore, with the Safety Advisory Group. Additionally, there are court cases and lawyers involved as well. And that's all part and parcel of the relationships that I had with West Ham.
Why do you think there has been, or West Ham have had the need to go to litigation? Why do you think there's that need?
Well, the short answer to your question is West Ham asked for the seating capacity to be increased from the previous agreement of 53,000 upwards. E20 agreed on condition of payment to increase those seating from 52,000 upwards to, roughly speaking, 56,000. West Ham didn't pay the payment that was agreed with E20 in E20's mind, nor shared the process of the benefit in the increase. West Ham will increase the capacity even further from, roughly speaking, 56,000 to, I think, 66,000, and are expecting E20 to do it for free and bear the cost. That means the taxpayer bearing the cost, by the way, and not sharing in the proceeds of the increased capacity. I've summarised in shorthand what was behind the latest court case. I may have got some of the details wrong. So that's the dispute, and unfortunately not being able to resolve that amicably. And so my understanding is West Ham are pursuing matters through litigation in the courts.
But yet at no time you thought, as the Mayor of London, that you could step in and help the process, and that you could meet with senior people at West Ham United in order to help resolve some of these issues. At no time you felt that was appropriate.
It's not for me to describe the previous relationships the Mayor had with the Vice Chair of West Ham or with West Ham United. On all operations, whether it's the Garden Bridge, whether it's other projects to do with City Hall, it's really important we act properly.
We're not talking about how
so
good Boris
what's
is.
happened
What we're asking
is E20
is why,
and LLDC
since
have
January
been speaking regularly
2017, Mr.
to
Mayor,
West
you
Ham.
haven't
What I'm
felt
not
it
in
necessary to
favour
meet.
of is a democracy, particularly when it's taxpayers' money involved. And that's why it's really important that we carry on talking to West Ham as LLDC and E20 are.
Yeah, so
and I'm meeting the Vice Chairman next
Mayor,
week.
that you
The
haven't
meeting's gonna
deemed
have a
it
purpose.
necessary to meet with anyone from West Ham.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
So important that you haven't deemed it necessary to meet with anybody. If
Sorry,
it's so important,
Yeah.
why haven't you deemed it necessary to meet with anybody?
As I've explained, LLDC, and E20 meet regularly and talk regularly with West Ham.
But
There
you're
is
the man
separately,
in charge, aren't you, Mr. Mayor?
our lawyers talk regularly as well, and there is
So in
separately
your judgment, Mr. Mayor,
an
you've
alternative
not
dispute
deemed it
resolution
necessary
taking
to
place
meet
as
till
well.
now. Thank
Sorry?
you. That's fine.
Can we now go on, please, to the written questions, the oral questions as now set out on the order paper. And the first question relates to fly tipping, and it's in the name of Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you very much for your question. I want to thank you and the Labour Group for their recent report, Unwanted Goods, Unwanted Mess, tackling London's fly tipping nuisance. Fly tipping continues to be a very expensive nuisance, and one that has no place in a modern society. The report identifies the lack of easily available information about what households and businesses should do with their waste as one of the factors that lead to fly tipping. The responsibility for tackling fly tipping lies with boroughs and the Environment Agency. I have no powers to take enforcement action on what I agree is a blight on some of our public spaces and a waste of taxpayers' money. Boroughs are responsible for the clean-up of the smaller scale fly tipping in London, and I remain concerned that the ability of London boroughs to effectively prosecute fly tippers, as well as providing other frontline waste and recycling collection services, is being seriously hampered by continued budget pressures as a result of cuts from national government. If we're to really reduce the scourge of fly tipping in London, it's critical that government provides the necessary resources to cash-strapped boroughs for enforcement. The Environment Agency is responsible for dealing with larger-scale fly tipping in London, but GLA officers have been working with the Riverside Environmental Crime Group, where fly tipping is more prevalent, to work to improve the sharing of information across agencies, to reduce fly tips and effectively prosecute those that do. Even though I have no formal powers, I have also proposed in my draft London Environment Strategy to support efforts to consolidate business waste collection services, which will mean more business waste can be collected and recycled, so there's less chance of it being fly tipped. Additionally, My Greener City Fund includes community green space grants that enables community groups, charities and boroughs to apply for funding to transform neglected areas into greener and more community spaces. This will make it more difficult for fly tippers to illegally dump waste out of the eyes of the public.
Well, thank you very much for that, Mr Mayor. That's really helpful. And obviously, I do agree with you that one of the issues facing all London boroughs is the fact that there have been these cuts to budgets through so-called austerity. But one of the issues that has emerged in the report, and we're seeing this 58% increase in fly tipping over the last few years, which is an absolutely astronomical figure, is that some of the councils are using different methodology that's inconsistent in terms of the data recording. Yeah. And I wondered if that was something that you would be prepared to pick up with the London councils and the Environment Agency, so that we have the rather famous level playing field, but in relation to the data collection processes.
We do need, you're right to make this point, a consistent approach when it comes to reporting data. The good news is that the London Environment Directors Network, those that aren't aware of this is all the borough environmental directors and London councils. They're working closely together, and they've commissioned an insights report from Keep Britain Tidy on fly tipping incidents, behaviour and approaches to tackle fly tipping nationally. The report will culminate in recommendations on good national good practice, and these could be adopted by London boroughs. We're working with them on the project, and they've identified the disparity of data in relation to fly tipping. And so you're right to say it's not really a level playing field, and we're hoping that the recommendation to have a consistent approach is one that will be taken on by London boroughs.
Well, it'd be great to be kept updated on that. The London Waste and Recycling Board obviously has quite a strong role to play in this. And one of the issues that has come up in relation to fly tipping, and also in relation to the recent report launched only yesterday from the Environment Committee on the circular economy, waste and recycling, is that we think a lot of Londoners don't know that there are a lot of projects around where they can more effectively put things into reuse, the so-called circular economy. Charity retail partnerships have been set up in some boroughs and may be effective. And we just think that more information, more publicity, is that something that the London Waste and Recycling Board would work on?
Well, look, the London Waste and Recycling Board doesn't have a duty to tackle fly tipping, but you're right. There's a circular economy, and why can't they be involved in encouraging others to do more? So why don't I speak to the London Waste and Recycling Board and encourage them to communicate and promote these opportunities more widely.
And you talked about the research that's being done by Keep Britain Tidy. I was also wondering whether the GLA Evidence and Insights team might commission some research into the reasons for fly tipping and the big increase in London. There's both the individual small scale, which makes up the vast majority of cases, but a lot of Assembly members from all parties actually have been telling me about gigantic fly tips, which we suspect are related to possibly the changes in stamp duty and people then doing lots of building work in their houses, and we're finding they don't know that they should check that people have a waste transfer licence from builders. Is that something that we could look into, the massive cases as well as the increase in the small-scale cases?
Well, I'm hoping one of the things that the detailed work that's been done by the London Environment Directors Network, the project they're doing, the commissioning, the Insights report, will look at some of these issues because it's really important we understand what's led to the massive increase. Is it lack of information? People aren't aware. Is it because there's now different boroughs, different policies? The charge is a deterrent. And so we're hoping that the research that's undertaken will give us some of the answers, and then clearly we need to work together to address this issue. I mean, enforcement is really important, but you're right. It's worth asking the question, doing some research, why there's been a sudden increase, and so trying to see if we can stop people fly tipping in the first place, but also bearing in mind the stretched resources, taking tougher enforcement action as well.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Could we now welcome students from St Saviour's and St Olive's School, Elephant and Castle, and from the St Mary Magdalene School, Greenwich. Thank you. The next question is from Assembly Member Curtin and relates to Brexit.
Thank you. As Mayor, the priority for me at this point is not how we mark the day when we leave the EU, but how we ensure we get a good Brexit deal that works for Londoners. I think this is the right approach. Brexit is an historic challenge facing our city and our country, by far the biggest challenge we've faced in a generation. It's caused a great deal of anxiety and uncertainty for many of our fellow Londoners, particularly those who are EU citizens and their family and friends. Businesses are also concerned. The recent independent analysis I commissioned showed the real economic costs and human costs at stake. Although we're just a year away from the 29th of March 2019, it's clear the government is still far from being in a position to negotiate a good deal for Britain. I welcome the apparent progress we've seen on securing a transitional agreement, but the Prime Minister now only has until October to secure the bespoke Brexit deal she wants, one that guarantees unfettered trade in goods and services at the same time as stopping the free movement of people. This is a massive task. Ultimately, this is about working to protect the jobs, livelihoods and the quality of life of all Londoners, and that's what I'll continue to do during the weeks and months ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I mean, the day when we leave Brexit, which is the 29th of March next year, it's only a year away, and you mark many things as Mayor. You've marked the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. I'm sure you'll be marking the 50th anniversary of the death of Martin Luther King next month. I'm not sure if you've made plans for that, but don't you think that as this is the most important thing that's going to happen in your 4 years of office, and 17.4 million people in the country voted for Brexit, and 1.4 million people in London voted for Brexit, which is more than voted for you as Mayor, 1.1 million. Don't you think that it's right to celebrate this wonderful occasion when we're getting back our independence and our sovereignty from the European Union?
Well, look, I mean, I think you'll find more people voted in London to remain in the EU than voted to leave. If your party's still around next year, I'd be curious to see what ideas you have. Maybe there'll be a bucket going round for the legal fees they've got to pay in the next couple of weeks. I'm looking forward to seeing which party you represent next time there's Mayor's question time. Maybe we'll mark that day with a celebration when UKIP's finally abolished.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'll still be here representing UKIP right up until 2020. And I think what I will be saying to you, Mr. Mayor, coming up next year isn't the right thing to do to mark the day we leave the European Union, to take down that EU flag outside City Hall. Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, clearly, Chair, when we leave the European Union, then there'll be questions about why the flag should remain. Bearing in mind we've left the European Union up until we leave the EU, it will stay up.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I think we will differ on the importance of the celebrations of marking this great occasion. Okay.
Next question is from Assembly Member Berry, and I should say that the question in the name of Assembly Member Boff is now down for written reply, Mr. Mayor, please. Okay. So we're moving on to the question from Assembly Member Berry, which relates to estate regeneration ballots.
Thank you, Chair. Good estate regeneration can deliver safer and better quality homes for local people and provide a valuable contribution to the overall supply of homes. However, if not done properly, estate regeneration can lead to disagreement between residents and their landlords, resulting in residents feeling they have not been consulted, social housing being lost, and displaced tenants and leaseholders getting a bad deal. That's why in February I published my Good Practice Guide to Estate Regeneration, which sets out the best practice approaches and principles I expect to be followed in estate regeneration schemes in London. I'm sure you welcome this. This guide was published following extensive consultation on a draft last year. My final guide is designed to help improve the standard of consultation and involvement by putting residents at the heart of developing plans wherever estate regeneration is proposed. I set out in the guide 2 key ways in which I intend to use the powers available to me. First, I'll use my planning powers on schemes of 150 homes or more, the normal threshold for applications to be referred to me, to ensure no net loss of affordable housing and an uplift in affordable homes wherever possible. Second, in the guide I also make clear how I'll use my funding powers to require resident support through a ballot for major schemes. That's why I'm consulting on a proposed funding condition to require residents' ballots where GLA funding is sought. The consultation outlines proposed transitional arrangements that will apply following the implementation of my new funding condition. These arrangements are designed to ensure that the condition applies only to new proposals for estate regeneration rather than those which are already underway. It may seem clear-cut for some schemes whether they are new or underway, but I recognise there has to be a cut-off point somewhere, which is why I'm consulting on the details of these arrangements. I can confirm that no GLA funding contracts for new estate regeneration schemes will be signed until after the consultation is closed and the precise details of the funding condition have been finalised and published.
That's great. Thank you, Miss.
That will do. Silence. 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 I must ask you to leave the chamber. Please escort those people out. We'll adjourn for 2 minutes whilst these people are cleared.
GLA, chamber, sound. 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 GLA, chamber, sound.
Assembly Member Berry appears not to have understood my instruction to return within 2 minutes. I wonder, since Assembly Member Shah is here, if we could please go on to his question, which relates to automatic fire suppression. Naughty Assembly Member Berry. Had you finished?
Had I finished? No, I barely started. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think before we broke up there briefly, you had confirmed that you would not be signing off any new GLA funding contracts during this period of consultation before your new funding guidance comes in. Is that correct?
I can confirm that no GLA-funded contracts for new estate regeneration schemes will be signed until after the consultation is closed and the precise details of the funding condition have been finalised and published.
When you say new estate regeneration schemes, you mean you just won't sign any new contracts?
I'll be signing no new funding contracts until consultation ended.
Yeah.
And we've published the final code.
Great, that's what I thought you said. I wanted to say something about some research I've commissioned through YouGov. This was
I've
with...
seen it.
No, not yet, I'm just telling you about it now. This is with a representative sample of Londoners, and I know the consultation came out very much in favour of ballots, but so does a poll of Londoners. 64% of people agreed with your new policy, 13% opposed the idea, and I hope you'll find that encouraging to know that Londoners as a whole think you're doing the right thing by putting the right to a ballot in place for estate residents. Just a few more things about the pause in contracts, if that's okay. What will you do when it comes back for councils who are trying to use the exception that you've set out, where you say you might take into account consultations already held and not require a ballot, even if those consultations were not a ballot held under the terms of your guidance? Will you be seeking to allow councils to say their previous consultations were okay? That seems to be what your draft technical consultation says.
So, if you require funding for an estate regeneration that involves the demolition of even one home, it's got to be a scheme more than 150 for the reasons you're aware of, then there needs to be a ballot. I think the issue you may be referring to is where there is planning permission for a redevelopment, regeneration. It requires, and there'll be X percent of affordable homes, and the council says we can have X plus Y percent, we can have even more affordable homes with some financial support. And that's where I think that's what...
No, this is an exception to holding a ballot. And you say if the council's already held its own consultation, even if it's not under the strict terms of your guidance, i.e. not actually a ballot, but a door-to-door survey or something else. And if that's already happened, you've said that you might let them have an exception to a ballot. Is that right? I mean, surely you should be sticking to the guidance for everything, especially if you're going to have a pause. It gives them time to do a ballot.
Well, I've set out my answer today. But obviously, well, the consultation is the consultation. The expectation you should have of me is when it comes to us looking at the final funding code, I'll be saying to anybody who wants funding, you must, if you're demolishing a home, have a ballot. But there's the discussion about the transitional arrangements of those schemes already in play where there's two separate issues. One is planning permission, one is funding. So there could be a situation where a funding agreement's been signed off before this happening, where permission's not gone through. That's an example where we'd be breaching contract to remove funding. But my expectation would be not simply consultation and engagement. I'd be hoping, although I can't force you to respectively because the agreement's been signed.
But where you've not signed it, you're expecting them to get on with ballots.
Exactly right.
Great, thank you, cheers.
Okay, is that it? Now, Assembly Member Shah.
Is it the same?
This is on the automatic fire suppression systems.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for your question. And can I thank you and the Planning Committee for your work on the Never Again report, which talks about sprinklers being the next steps towards safer homes. I fully support London Fire Brigade's position on sprinklers and would like to see them installed more widely in buildings across London. Sprinklers play a significant role in reducing the impact of fire on people, property and the environment as part of an appropriate package of fire safety measures. They also assist firefighters in carrying out search and rescue operations by limiting fire development, which significantly reduces the risk to firefighters. London Fire Commissioner Danny Cotton has spoken openly about the benefits of sprinklered buildings and how much they can make a difference in extinguishing fires, raising the alarm, preventing further damage and saving lives. In my draft London plan launched in November, I focused on stepping up fire safety measures in the wake of the Grenfell Tower fire. My new policy means robust fire safety plans and features to stop fire spreading and aid escape, rescue and evacuation, such as fire evacuation lifts and sprinklers. They must be incorporated into building designs from the outset. The safety of Londoners is my first priority. It's time the government Local authorities, builders and developers seized this opportunity to raise fire safety standards to the highest possible level.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your support for the report. And I'm also delighted that London Fire Brigade have formally this morning confirmed their support for the report as well, which bodes well. Altogether in the report, we have 8 recommendations. I'd like to invite your comment and hopefully support for 3 recommendations in particular, which I wish to highlight. The first one is about the mandatory compulsory requirement for sprinklers. Do you agree, Mr. Mayor, with the long-term objective of mandatory sprinkler systems requirement in all residential buildings, and in the interim, mandatory requirement for sprinklers to protect vulnerable residents in new accommodations, such as care homes and residential blocks over 18-meter height?
So I'm a bit nervous answering you, knowing that Fiona's over there, and I've not spoken to the Fire Commissioner. But let me say yes. Look, I think whilst it'd be ideal for all domestic premises to have sprinklers, it's not practical in the short term. That's why I like the way you said long-term objective. But you're right, in premises where there are vulnerable residents, there are real issues about their ability to leave the home quickly, and the other concerns that we have around vulnerable residents, delays in evacuation, they're less mobile, the impact of a fire on them is more. And so I like the way you prioritising those, bearing in mind long-term everyone, in the short term, focus on those that are vulnerable. So the short answer is yes, but I'm sure you'll get a detailed response from the Fire Commissioner and the Deputy Mayor of Fire and Resilience shortly.
Thank you. The final, one of the key recommendations also is about setting up a 50 million London sprinkler retrofitting fund. And that is where we have recommended that you lobby the government for a fund to this value to provide retrofitting in terms of prioritizing 200 existing high-risk residential buildings in London occupied by vulnerable people. Are you happy to support such a fund and lobby the government and put in your share as well? Thank you.
I'm very happy to lobby the government. Just point of information, the government's instructed the Hackett review, which will look into this sort of issue. Separately, there's additional concern around leaseholders, what happens there. I've been lobbying the government in relation to stepping in to help out not just leaseholders, but those who council and housing associations. I'll continue to do so.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, no doubt our report will feed into Dame Judith Hackett's review.
Great.
As such as there are some strong evidence-based recommendations. But indeed, this 50 million fund over a 5-year period, depending on the cost, but we reckon it can, something like it can fund something like about 20,000 dwellings of high risk. And therefore, it is important that we do not wait any longer, but get action going so that, we eliminate the risk of fire. Thank you.
Sir.
Next question is from Assembly Member Devonish, and it relates to tube noise.
Thank you for your question. I'm not sure it's for me to suggest how individuals should react, but since becoming Mayor, I've been very clear that I take the issue of tube noise extremely seriously. Before the launch of the night tube, I ensured that TfL established a comprehensive process to deal with noise complaints. This, however, is a complex issue, and there aren't always quick answers. But I remain committed to ensuring that TfL continue to explore solutions to reducing noise levels. I believe the residents you referenced in your question are the residents in Holland Park. I've challenged TfL, who have assured me that they are doing everything possible to reduce noise for the residents, but I appreciate this will offer little consolation for residents. TfL has been undertaking work to install new track in the area using high-performing steel with more resilient track fastenings, as well as smoothing misalignments to reduce noise levels. As you know, there are many sites across the network where, due to the age of the track and current technology, it's not always possible to reduce the noise levels to the standard that residents would like. This does not mean that I and TfL do not take noise concerns seriously. WHO guidelines state that 42 decibels is proposed as the best estimate of the threshold for awakening by transport noise events such as trains passing. No adverse effects on health are to be expected below this level. TfL measurements show that all of the sites in question from these complaints are at or below this level. Notwithstanding this, I will continue to press TfL to carry on actively working with suppliers, researchers and academics to innovate and develop new technology to improve noise levels across the network.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your pre-Christmas meeting with myself and Assembly Member Dismore and Prince with various residents on this challenging issue. But would you agree with me that when Mr. Wild, as Managing Director of TfL, literally writes to my residents and says he's unable to do anything, which is basically what he said, that isn't good enough?
Thank you for raising this. I did ask to see the letter you referred to, and I can see why it's distressing. I mean, I met some of the residents you and Keith and Andrew brought along, and the quality of their lives is so severely impacted, lack of sleep, sleep deprivation, and so I can understand why they're incredibly distressed, because the impression they've been given is that's it. And I wanted to reassure you, and please reassure your residents, that I will make sure TfL haven't given up. And so when I talk about in my answer to research, innovation, I've even asked them to look at other cities around the world. I've got examples, just so you know, around Delhi, some other sites around the world I can share with you, Sydney and stuff, to say, can we learn from other cities as well? Because, you know, we all know what it's like not being able to sleep for a night. Imagine doing that night after night after night. So we aren't giving up, and I apologise if the impression was given that we've written off those residents and aren't going to try and improve things.
Thank you. You also mentioned the figure of 42 decibels in your answer. Now, I know this has to be checked by your experts, but the email response from my residents after Mr. Wild's email talked about the figure going up from 38, and now it's at 43. Now, we can query over decibels. Would you arrange for your Deputy Mayor to meet with me on the site with residents, please, so we can take this further? Because I know we all have to shout louder, because this is a major issue across London, but while some areas have improved in recent months and years, clearly this area, Holland Park, Notting Hill, hasn't improved, and I really need to get to the bottom of this.
I'm happy to give that commitment. Can I also just say this? My understanding is, and like you implied, I'm not an expert here, but some of this could be to do with there are more basements than other areas, so it's to do with vibration. So I'm not pretending to be an expert, but because I looked into this, why is it that sometimes when the noise in decibel levels is not as high as it was elsewhere, the impact is felt much greater? And I was explained to me it's to do with the vibrations and when there's more basement evacuations. But I'm happy to give you that commitment to arrange for the relevant people to go and meet with you and the residents to listen to what you're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you again for that meeting that you attended. The issue here, though, is that for my residents, it's more of noise rather than vibration.
Right.
And they are suffering some 50 plus decibels, which is horrendous at night. Now, no one's criticising, and I think it's worth putting in some record, no one's criticising TfL for the efforts they have made, because they really have tried very, very hard, and they've tried many innovative ideas to try and suppress the noise. One of the things that they are going to be doing in relation to my residents is putting up a wall, like a sound barrier. But can I firstly ask you, Mr. Mayor, to encourage TfL to do that as soon as they possibly can? And secondly, Mr. Mayor, if that fails, can we please talk about what other remedial work can be done on the residents' property in order to mitigate these issues?
Well, I think, Chair, what I can commit to is to make sure TfL does what it can to reduce the noise. I think one of the ideas that they were looking into was reducing the speed of trains, which may seem an obvious idea. It came from one of your residents, I think.
It did.
Which they've not thought of. I'm sorry, it just seems an odd. So they'll try almost anything in relation to trying to reduce the noise. And that includes, by the way, the research and innovation we're talking about. But what we aren't in a position to do is to look at people's homes in relation to, I think you suggested at the meeting, triple glazing. We're not there. And I think what we need to do is carry on working to reduce the noise that has been referred to, including trying things not tried before, whether it's using barriers, reducing speeds, using technological changes. I think one of the examples given by the residents you brought, well, it may have been one of Tony's residents, was for a short period of time there was an improvement, then after, I think, 6 months it went back to what it was like, and so that may mean changing the way the engineering works. So Andrew Dismall's raised an example where the way the prioritisation works often means some residents get left out, and so we're willing to look at most things, including changing the way we do engineering stuff, and I'll carry on engaging with the Assembly members through Val.
Would you, Mr Mayor, at least ask TfL to get a move on in relation to the sound barrier?
I'm hoping one of my team's made a note of that, and we'll chase that up, yep.
Thank you very much, very kind.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Cooper, and it's about Thames Water.
Thank you. I was extremely disturbed to see the recent supply issues which caused many Londoners to be left without water, some for up to 4 days. It is simply unacceptable that thousands of Londoners, households and businesses were affected across London. The unusually cold weather was a factor in the burst water mains and supply disruptions, but there is an expectation that water companies have plans for this kind of extreme weather event and will inform customers in advance of any expected disruption. I've written to Thames Water and Affinity Water, who experienced the biggest problems at the start of this month, and expressed my concern that Londoners are paying the price of poor planning and decades of underinvestment in London's water mains. I'd already been putting pressure on Thames Water since the spate of major water mains bursts in 2016 to ask them to do more to reduce the risks of main bursts in London. The Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy, Shirley Rodriguez, has worked closely with Thames Water to apply pressure to reduce leakage and mains bursts. Thames Water are currently taking too reactive an approach. They need to proactively identify where there is a potential for leaks and mains bursts using modern technology. I also want to see a greater level of investment in mains replacement to accelerate a programme which is behind schedule whilst minimising disruption to Londoners. I'm clear that the cost of redressing this should not fall on Londoners to bear. I've asked both Thames Water and Affinity Water to improve their communication and engagement with customers, especially vulnerable customers. This was extremely poor, especially to do with emergency bottled water distribution, and also for Thames Water to improve their compensation offer. I would expect Affinity Water to offer the same level so there is an equitable response across London. I'm also calling for the regulator Ofwat to take more action to improve water company performance. I've written to the Chair asking him to use Ofwat's full regulatory powers to ensure London's water companies make significant improvements. It is clear, in the long term, new resources are needed to meet Londoners' water needs.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Mayor. One of the things that came out just before this spate of burst pipes and lack of supply for so many Londoners, including actually staff in this building and many of my neighbours in Balham and Tooting, was that they've just produced an 80-year water resource management plan. And in that plan, they're requesting that Londoners should do a lot to reduce their water usage. Would you agree with me that it's going to be impossible for us to sell that to Londoners as politicians with responsibility for making sure that there is water supply? And we know that the climate is changing and therefore London is already a dry city. We don't want to face what's about to happen potentially in Cape Town, but it's going to be really hard to sell to Londoners that they should reduce their water use when they see fountains bursting out of roads and not being fixed for 20 days. We've just had one example in Putney. And would you agree with me that we need to see Thames Water stepping up?
Absolutely, by the way, not all fountains are bad things. We're trying to have some more. We're trying to open up some this summer, but I know what you mean. So you're right. On the one hand, we are trying to encourage businesses and those of us who live in London to reduce water usage. On the other hand, we see massive inefficiencies in relation to leaks, major leaks that could have been spotted in advance and dealt with. And so my draft London Environment Strategy actually talks about some of the things we can be doing to reduce usage. We're also encouraging in the draft London plan new buildings to be less reliant on the amount of water they have in the past. But you're right, they've got to raise their game. Those are some of the conversations that Shirley Rodriguez and my team have had with Thames Water, and it's really important they use technology and innovation, but also investment to try and reduce these leakages.
Their comms were terrible during the recent problem stage. They were mainly communicating on Twitter, which is fine for those of us who are on Twitter. Anyone who's not on Twitter didn't know really what was going on and when their leaks were going to be fixed. And also they ran out of water bottles at some of the stations. Is there more that they could also be doing in the immediate aftermath of problems and issues?
from my experience, what happened in South London, I thought Thames Water were poor. The comms was poor. The numbers of stations was poor. The figure they gave my deputy mayor for the number of vulnerable people just can't be accurate, because I refuse to accept there are only that number of vulnerable people in my part of where I live in London. But also bearing in mind, as you know from the experience we had with the water leakage, and by the way, there's North London as well, hospitals, primary care, but also mental health institutions, schools. It was really, really poor. And I think it's really important lessons are learned from this. That's one of the things I've said in my correspondence with Thames Water, with Affinity, and with the regulator. One of the things that Shirley will be discussing when she meets, she does regularly with Thames Water as we go forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next question is from Assembly Member Hall and relates to Vorg's strategy. Oh, I do beg your pardon. I don't know which of you it is. It's the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, I'm very pleased you've highlighted the plight of vulnerable people, and I too have concerns about whether a list of vulnerable people are actually up to date and accurate. So I would ask you to raise that as a constant in those talks that you're having. But my constituents had water cut off for considerable time, and at one stage there was only 2 bottle plants where you could go to collect, one in South London, one in North London, which was useless for my constituents. It implied that in those dangerous conditions they had to drive to get water. And I noticed on Twitter someone tweeted they had a 7-week-old baby and all the shops around her were out of bottled water, and what should she do? So I think in crisis like this, there's those vulnerable lists that Thames Water and other water companies have, but there also must be a separate procedure for people who don't meet that criteria but who are in genuine dire straits to actually get some personal help. Will you raise that with them too?
Well, of course we'll raise that with them and make sure that they're sent a transcript of what you've just said. It's really important that they understand the problems there were this time. But the Deputy Mayor for Fire and Resilience has recently been appointed. Why don't I ask Deputy Mayor Fiona Twycross to also, as Chair of the London Resilience Forum, to look into this issue, because this sort of data capturing is important, because there could be other sorts of instances in London where we need to know who the vulnerable people are and how to help them. One of the great things about the water problems there were recently, the experience that Assembly Member Cooper and I will have, is the great neighbourhood spirit. Actually, you saw friends coming to each other's neighbours, people who hadn't spoken in the past. I'm sure the women you talk about hopefully got a response with the 7-month child baby. So although actually it was good to see that sort of resilience amongst Londoners, we've got to plan for this much better and prepare for this. And so I'll ask Fiona to look into this as Chair of the London Resilience Forum, and I'll make the points you've so forcibly made to Thames Water and Affinity as well.
Assembly Member Duval.
Thank you very much, Chair. My colleague, Assembly Member Florence Ashalomi, would, if she was here, be saying to you today that, echoing your remarks about Thames Water's performance, that lack of information, the lack of coordination between statutory agencies, but she would ask, and maybe you could ask your Deputy Mayor for Fire and Resilience to include whether there is a case for us supporting strengthening that community resilience in times of emergency, and whether we can, and whether you have a role via the resilience strategy of whether we could invest in some time and energy of making sure that if there is community resilience, the priorities are in the right way.
Can I say this is such an important question? I mean, we are today commemorating the horrible acts of last year, 22nd of March, terror attack. But it's worth reminding ourselves this community resilience is important for, God forbid, a terror attack, or if there's a gas leak, or some other major incident happen. And so then, why don't I also I'll ask the Deputy Mayor for Social Integration to work with Fiona about some work we could do to try and make sure, in a non-patronising way, we educate Londoners what more can be done, but also have the data in relation to where people are, where vulnerable communities are, and the point Leonie made, not everyone's on Twitter. And so even if we are very good at people-to-people comms via Twitter, it doesn't really help if you're a vulnerable person without access to social media. So, point well made, and we'll look into that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question now is from Assembly Member Hall, and it relates to Vaughan's strategy.
Thank you very much for your question. On the 9th of March, I published my strategy to tackle violence against women and girls and the misogynistic attitudes that allow these crimes to continue, backed by a record £44 million investment up to 2020. The strategy is 99 pages long. I want to make London the safest city in the world for women and girls, and that means every Londoner and every organisation playing their part to promote equality and to challenge sexist and misogynist attitudes wherever they're encountered. My new wide-ranging strategy follows the biggest in-depth consultation with survivors, as well as Londoners, police and partners. It includes measures to tackle rape, sexual assault, female genital mutilation, trafficking, controlling behaviour, forced marriages, stalking, harassment and misogyny, building on the recent international Me Too and Time's Up campaigns. The strategy puts forward a comprehensive package of measures to intervene and prevent violence against women and girls, to tackle dangerous individuals who pose a risk in our communities, and to improve services for victims who have already suffered so much. On prevention, we'll improve safety in public spaces, including a new Women's Night Safety Charter, continuing to tackle unwanted sexual behaviour on the transport network, and a new campaign to tackle attitudes of everyday sexism and misogyny. On perpetrators, I'm investing £4 million in programmes to tackle stalking, and I'm working with police and criminal justice partners to ensure the most effective handling of dangerous individuals, providing over £3 million to expand the Rehabilitative Drive project. And on supporting victims, we're investing £200,000 to support London Council's Harmful Practices programme, training nurses, midwives and social workers to recognise abuses such as female genital mutilation and to intervene.
Thank you, Mayor. Your violence against women and girls strategy is indeed 99 pages long. And yet you've decided to just devote one page, plus a couple of very small other mentions, to female genital mutilation. Now, this is a very serious subject in the context of abuse to women. National health figures show that health professionals have identified 2,500 cases of FGM in London alone, and that's 50% of all the cases in the country. So do you think one page does justice to the weight and seriousness of a subject that you so rightly define within your one page as child abuse?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure if I would characterise the entire strategy on FGM as the one page in the, as you called it, in the document. It's an issue we take very seriously, which is why it was backed up by investment, and why in the additional monies that I allocated to policing in the last budget hearing, we allocated additional money to FGM. I've also looked at the report from the Assembly on FGM, which the Chair, Janet Arnold, has done a forwarded, and I think all the recommendations in there are things that our policies are doing.
If you take it so seriously, Mayor, I would suggest it warrants far more than one page. Lots of other subjects had far more than just one page. Within this one page, I'd like to bring your attention to a paragraph in it. There's been a drive in recent years to empower the police around FGM and focus on achieving prosecutions. Despite this, you wrote the following statement in the strategy. While legislation has proved the tool to take action, many believe there is too much emphasis on prosecutions, and we are aware that some consider this not to be in the interest of the child, who may suffer additional trauma if the life of the family is broken up through the prosecution of parents or other relatives. I understand that since this has been highlighted, your office have been forced to clarify that this isn't necessarily your view, which I'm very relieved to hear. But do you actually think it was necessary to give credence to those thoughts on this one page containing all the information that you were going to give on FGM?
Can I find it astonishing if anybody was trying to make cheap party points in FGM or trying to mislead the Assembly? Because if you read on, it says...
Yes, I know, I've read it.
If you read on, it says, we advocate for enforcement action to take place alongside efforts which focus on prevention and encourage local areas to invest in provisions which support women and girls at risk of FGM in London. It also goes on talk about the work taking place in enforcement. It says, for example, and I'm sure you're not misleading the Assembly, the MPS has our full support in seeking to arrest and prosecute more perpetrators. It's funny how you didn't read that bit on the page,
Yes,
but you read
no,
the previous bit.
I can assure
Some
you,
would say
I
you try to
have
mislead the Assembly to make cheap points on FGM.
No, I'm sure every Assembly member that needs to has actually read the 99-page document, and I'm sure many of them cannot understand why there is just one page on FGM if you are so interested in it, which you purport to be. I've never seen anything like that written around domestic violence. One could quite happily say that some would say, ignore domestic violence because if you do anything, it will break the family up. But of course we wouldn't say that. It's too serious. FGM is very serious, Mr. Mayor, and to actually dedicate one page out of 99 pages to it without any promise of where we're going, we must consider that we still haven't had one prosecution and 50% of all cases are in London. I would suggest that you should be taking this far more serious,
Well, Chair,
Mr. Mayor.
it's quite astonishing that this Assembly member holds the Mayor accountable for the actions of judges, juries, the CPS. It's quite astonishing, but that's what we expect from people who want to make cheap points on FGM. The reality is that our strategy talks about enforcement, tough enforcement. The subheading, which was not read out, again, by the Assembly member, was a stronger response to harmful practices, a stronger response. So enforcement is crucial, so is education and community engagement. Why do we know so? Because the Assembly, of which she's a member, told me so in their report a few weeks and months ago. So look, I appreciate the challenges there are for the Assembly member to make party points at MQTs, but not on FGM. Not on FGM. That's beneath even her.
Well, you're very often rude, Mr. Mayor, but you've excelled yourself today. My point being, it's your strategy, yet another strategy, let me point out, that has got absolutely no key performance indicators in it, absolutely no direction of where it's going, which actually strategies should. And my actual point, and I don't make it as a cheap political point, is the fact that many of us around this table think FGM is worthy of a great deal more than one page in a 99-page document. In truth, one has to wonder whether you wanted it in there at all, because there's lots and lots of pages on misogyny, domestic violence, and quite right too, but one measly page on FGM. Perhaps we should make that clear to all these associations and charities that are doing their very best to bring this to the attention of everybody. It's a heinous crime, and something needs to be done to it. And I would say, again, it's not a cheap political point. More than one page deserves to be in a document that is about women and girls.
Well, Chair, let me respond to that speech and give you some examples of the excellent work we're doing in this area. Operation Limelight, not mentioned by the Assembly member, a multi-agency safeguarding operation we're doing with the UK border, delivered extensively at Heathrow Airport pre and post the 3 main school holidays. It's been adopted at airports across the country, and I myself wrote to the heads of schools before the last summer holidays. The London Honour-based abuse working group has been established, which brings together strategic leads and key stakeholders in London for both FGM and forced marriage, and is providing effective governance and Met Police Service response to HBA. Working extensively with London Councils, Local Authority, Children's Social Care, CPS, UKBF, NHS England and others to deliver multi-agency events and training aimed at improving information and sharing effective safeguarding, particularly through the promotion of FGM protection orders, not mentioned by the Assembly member. Promotion of the effective police response to FGM through proactive engagement with the media, also not mentioned by the Assembly member. And we shouldn't talk about, because it's sub judice, the case going through the courts now, which could be the first successful prosecution. So I'm disappointed that the Assembly member, for the sake of making a cheap point, is using FGM to do so. I'm confident that we have a policy in place and we're now investing monies in relation to the policy, including, which I think is really important, education and community engagement. I'm disappointed if the Assembly member doesn't think it's important to have education and community engagement.
Assembly member Both.
Mr. Mayor, in your commitments in the strategy, you say that you wish to put into place a strategic response across London to encourage women to leave prostitution. What services should be available to those women who do not wish to leave prostitution?
So I don't follow.
I'll ask it another
So
way.
I thought this was FGM. It's not we've moved off FGM.
The question's on the entire strategy.
Okay, fine.
I want to know that those services that are going to be available to those women who wish to leave prostitution, as you put it, are also available to those women who don't wish to leave prostitution. Will the same services be available to women who don't wish to leave prostitution?
Sure, I'm not sure why they wouldn't be. I've misunderstood the question. Apologies if it was my fault, not yours.
Your commitment within your violence against women strategy, I'll help you out. I think it's 92.
Thank you.
93, I beg your pardon, 93. MOPAC will work with the London Vogue Board and London Heads of Community Safety to put into place a strategic response across London to encourage women to leave prostitution. It's your strategy. I mean, I'm kind of, some people could read that it's quite misogynistic that a male mayor should be telling women what to do, but it's in the strategy. What I want to know is whether or not those services that are going to be available to women who want to leave prostitution are also going to be available to those women who wish to remain in sex work.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you also, Mr. Mayor, let me know that you realise that if you were to market such services as being available for people who wish to exit prostitution, that this may be an obstacle for women to connect with those services.
Can I just reassure you, because you raised a really important point about how we ensure that people feel the services are for them. We've had even though the mayor's a bloke, the biggest in-depth consultation of a violence against women and girls strategy ever undertaken by City Hall, because I was conscious of the survivors' experience, what would make them receive a service, what would encourage them to come forward and receive a service. Many are trafficked, many are the victims of modern slavery, many haven't got the confidence, not just because of language, but for a variety of reasons to come forward. And Claire Waxman, the Victims Commissioner, spent a lot of time speaking to survivor groups, and the service that we provide must recognise the point you're alluding to, I think, which is some people won't have the confidence or feel it doesn't reflect their needs because of the way it's advertised. We've got to make sure that we make everyone feel they can approach the service if they need to use it.
I understand how you've couched that response, Mr. Mayor, but are you aware that there are people in sex work who want to be in sex work, who have not been coerced into sex work, and that is a choice that they have made, and until the law changes, that is a legal occupation?
Well, Chair, I think we're in danger of having a long discussion about an issue I disagree with this member about, and there's a time and place. We have a different, my experience of the sex workers in London is not the experience that the Assembly member has, but I'm happy to, through proper intermediaries,
we are getting into details.
Ask him to meet some of these survivors who have been trafficked and are, inverted commas, sex working in London.
I would be happy to do so, Mr. Mayor, if you could give an undertaking to meet some sex workers who are currently operating in London and want to continue being sex workers.
Well, I'm sure the Victims Commissioner, the Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime, will listen to what the Assembly member has sent and respond duly.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next question is from Assembly Member Pidgeon, and it relates to LPG vehicles in London.
Thank you for your question. My transport and environment strategies are clear that my vision is for London to be a zero-carbon city by 2050. In order to achieve that ambition, all vehicles must have zero exhaust emissions by that date. As a result, I've asked TfL to focus on zero-exhaust emission-capable vehicles powered by electricity or hydrogen. These offer the greatest potential emission reduction benefits, both in terms of local air quality and carbon emissions. To achieve our goal of zero-carbon city, we have worked with industry to create the world's first zero-emission-capable, fully accessible taxi. TfL is installing a network of rapid charging points across London, converting London's bus fleet to hybrid and zero-emission, and working with boroughs to create zero-emission zones in the local areas. LPG offers some potential carbon dioxide savings over petrol, but limited air quality benefits. The GLA and TfL have provided some support for the rollout of LPG vehicles for diesel taxis and commercial vehicles. For example, diesel taxis which have been converted to run on LPG may be eligible for an extension to the 15-year age limit. There are around 60 taxis operating in London which have been converted to use LPG. For commercial vehicles, TfL is working with industry stakeholders through the Low City programme to lower emissions through cleaner fuels and technologies. This includes carrying out trials, sharing knowledge and best practice, and working with manufacturers to bring forward new solutions. I'm supportive of any technology that has a proven ability to help reduce air pollution and carbon emissions, but to be clear, my focus is on getting to zero emissions as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much for your answer. And I know you're keen to clean up London's air, and I recognise your commitment on this issue. But I just think with the best will in the world, thousands of diesel vans and taxis are not just going to switch to electric overnight. Agree with some of the things you said, but there are some issues with the production of electric taxis, the charging network, all those things which will take some time. There has been a successful trial in Birmingham of LPG taxis. The project, I understand, we've seen about 80% reduction in NOx levels and reductions in PMs at around 99%. So seeing this as a potential, as a transition fuel to get to where you want to be, given the conversion costs only about £10,000 for taxis compared to 60,000 for a new electric taxi, will you look at this further as something as a transition to get to where you want to, this zero carbon city?
No, unlikely. I mean, we looked at Birmingham City. They received £500,000 from DFT in 2014, and the project was to convert 80 diesel taxis to use LPG. It's worth remembering that in Birmingham, they don't have the 15-year rule that we have. We don't license taxis older than 15 years. Birmingham does. What we noticed was carbon dioxide emissions increased significantly. And I'm not convinced, bearing in mind we have an age limit for taxis, they don't. Bearing in mind that we want to move to zero emission capable as soon as possible. We would encourage manufacturers to realise there's a market there for zero emission capable taxis. We've got the grant scheme. We're assisting those additionally with taxis between 10 and 15 years. I wouldn't want our priorities to be focused, or monies more importantly, towards LPG. If it was the case, the government was to give us additional money for LPG conversions, then of course I'd be willing to look into that, but at the moment they're not. The monies that we have got, we're using towards conversion towards zero emission capable.
Okay. I'm not saying this is the solution, I'm saying as a transition. 18 months ago, I raised this issue of LPG in this chamber, and you said to me, I recognise that the newest taxis today will be the last remaining diesel vehicles in the fleet, so we need to continue to explore options for drivers to convert to a cleaner fuel whilst their vehicle has a lot of life remaining. Can you give an absolute guarantee that the 5-year TfL licence extension for LPG vehicles will remain in place until 2030?
Well, my understanding is that we've got an agreement in relation to the taxes I referred to in my answer. I've not seen plans to change that, so I'm not sure, unless there's anything particularly you're worried about.
Okay. Would you look at ensuring many of the sort of diesel vans throughout the GLA family fleet, whether in the interim they might be converted to LPG if there isn't a suitable electric vehicle in the meantime?
Probably not. I mean, I'm not sure if it makes sense for me to spend £10,000 to convert to LPG when we're trying to move to zero emission capable. Like I said to you, the monies we've got, we're using to try and help people convert, provide carrots and incentives to move to zero emission capable. I'm not sure it makes sense to use the finite precious monies we've got to move to LPG. I mean, I've got a list. I'm not going to read out to you because you probably know this better than I do of the pros and cons of LPG, and the cons far outweigh the pros. I take your point though. You're not saying it's the panacea. You're saying it's a transitional step, and I'm not putting words in your mouth. So I understand that. My concern is I've got finite resources. We want to get to zero emission as soon as we can. And we're not the same as Birmingham.
Yeah, I mean, I was wanting to ask you, but I think you've kind of answered it, about whether you might use a small part of the funding that you've looked at as part of your taxi scrappage scheme to support converting some of those newer diesel vehicles to LPG. It sounds like you'd only do something like that if the government was prepared to put money in. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. All right, then. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next question is from Assembly Member Dr Sahota, and it relates to the diagnosis of syphilis in London.
Thank you very much for your question. The increase in the number of syphilis cases is very worrying, and so is the fact that half of the cases in England are in London. It's also a matter of concern that there are significant differences in rates of syphilis diagnosis between boroughs. More broadly, Public Health England's 2016 data shows that London has the highest rate of sexuality transmitted infections, STIs in England. Of the top 20 local authorities in England, with the highest rates of new STIs, 17 were in London. Clearly, there is more to be done to improve Londoners' sexual health. London's local authorities, not City Hall, have the responsibility for commissioning the services to screen and treat sexually transmitted infections, including syphilis. To be fair, boroughs have recognised the scale of the challenge and have collaborated to develop a London-wide approach, the London Sexual Health Programme, set up in 2015, and has been a new model which has seen a new model for commissioning sexual health services. From 2018, services have included a new online self-sampling kit, and clinics across London providing integrated sexual health services dealing with infection and contraception. The free, confidential online service is convenient for service users, designed around the changing ways people now access services, and delivers increased cost-effectiveness for commissioners. As the service develops, there is a potential to reach groups not currently in contact with services.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that. I mean, you recognise the magnitude of the problem, and of course, this is made worse by the fact that there's been a huge cut in public health budgets to local authorities. Something like £551 million have been clawed back from that budget, and I understand those other pressures on local authorities. But of course, this is a pan-London problem, and you allude to the fact there's huge variation amongst the various boroughs in the diagnosis rate. Is this something which you might take up with the Health Board and to make sure that we get a well-coordinated response across London?
Can I say, the reason why I'm pausing and then smirking, looking at you, is every time we have Mayor's Question Time, you want me to take on more responsibility for health matters, which I would love to do, but the problem is I've not got the powers or the resources, so I'm a bit nervous about taking on your challenge in relation to a whole host of issues. But you're right, I have got a leadership role. And why don't I do this? The Regional Public Health Director for London, Professor Yvonne Doyle, we meet regularly, and I chair the London Health Board. Why don't I speak to her about what we can do in relation to the pan-London role? Because you're right, many of these local authorities have lost money, which affects their commissioning ability, but also public health awareness as well. And so actually this is one where I think I should take it away and see what I can do as you know, the Mayor of London, and working with the professionals about how we can amplify some of the work they're doing.
Yeah, the reason I keep pushing these issues, of course, Mr. Mayor, because there has been, since 2012, a breakdown in the coordination role in London. There is no one who takes responsibility for coordinating things across London. That's been one of the impacts of the Social Care Act of 2012. But of course, the other thing is that this has impact on health inequalities, right? Okay, and the variation of services across London. So it's something I need to raise with you. But certainly, you've said, right, in your health inequality strategy, that we need to take a fresh focus on health education. And you talked in terms of HIV infections. I wonder if this can be widened up to look at sexually transmitted disease in the wider context, rather than just focusing on HIV.
So just to put the answer I gave in answer to your first question in context, our population has never been bigger, but also the number of young people in London has never been larger. And so that provides opportunities, but challenges as well. So yes, we're doing lots of good work around reducing HIV, but we can use the opportunity to refresh the Healthy Schools London programme, the London curriculum, both of which include PHSE, as a way of making sure young people understand the dangers of not doing things safely in relation to sex and other issues and stuff. So why don't I see if we can try and get into some of that work to do with not just reducing HIV, but also reducing STIs generally as well.
Good. Thank you.
The next question is from Assembly Member Dismore, and it's on fatal fires.
There have been 15 fatalities in fires in London in 2018. While these are recorded as fire deaths according to London Fire Brigade's evidence, it is important to note the inquests are pending, and it's for the coroner to determine whether or not the fire was the cause of death. 11 of the 15 people who died were over 60 years of age, and a number of them under a care plan. I know LFB does a lot of good work with care staff, neighbours and family members who look after or visit some of the most vulnerable residents to highlight the critical early warning signs that a person is at risk of a fire and getting advice on preventing a blaze. It's also worth reminding ourselves and Londoners that LFB offers free home safety visits where firefighters give potentially life-saving information on how to prevent fires, and they also fit free smoke alarms where needed. They're particularly targeted, these visits, towards Londoners' most vulnerable residents, and only 2 of those fatalities have received one of these visits. London Fire Brigade's evaluation of the effectiveness of home fire safety visits has shown vulnerable people are 18 times less likely to have a fire if they receive a home fire safety visit. LFB carry out fire investigations and fatal fire reviews, focusing on those deaths, and seeing if there are lessons that can be learnt to improve community safety as a result. And a number of these fires this year, you'll be interested to know, have been linked to portable heaters, and LFB has done a lot of campaign work to highlight the dangers of these as well. Just finally, you'll be aware that I've recently announced the appointment of Dr. Fiona Twycross as London's first ever Deputy Mayor for Fire and Resilience, and I'm sure the entire Assembly joins me in welcoming her to the position. Look forward to her starting the role next month.
Well, thank you for that answer, and obviously I join in congratulating Fiona on her appointment. But the number of fatalities seems to have gone up significantly this year so far, with the 15 deaths you referred to in under 3 months. And February was particularly bad, with I think 8 in 1 month. And they've occurred in a dozen different boroughs, so it's a London-wide concern. And the victims, as you indicated, on the whole, are elderly and also vulnerable. And you're right that investigations are still going on pending the inquest, but it looks like only 3 were known to social services, and as you say, only 2 had LFB fire safety visits. So there are clearly vulnerable people falling through the gaps, and I think it is becoming a public health issue. So what can social services, the London Fire Brigade and City Hall do to try and identify and reduce the risks of fire to such people?
It's a really important point because it can't be beyond the wit of us, excuse me, to be sharing data better. LFB, local councils and others as well. And we can even give the safeguards councils not unreasonably want around data protection. So in light of the point you've raised, let me go away and speak to the Fire Commissioner and the Deputy Mayor to see how we can promote better sharing of data, because if we know older people, vulnerable people are more likely to be the victims. We should know who they are, so we should be able to micro-target some of the assistance. And the Fire Brigade does, to be fair, when they do the home visits, is because they've received information. So let's see if we can improve that, bearing in mind some of the challenges around data protection sharing generally.
Well, that's very helpful. And in a number of these fires, I think, as you mentioned, I think at least 9, there were smoke alarms, but in 3 cases, these didn't activate. So what more can be done to ensure that all properties, especially those occupied by vulnerable people, have a fully functioning smoke alarm?
Well, a number of things. Firstly, I don't think we realise this. Just because we put up a smoke alarm that it's going to work forever. It doesn't, especially if it's battery operated. Obvious things are to encourage people to have fire alarms that are fitted to the mains, that's sealed in, long life batteries. But also those of us that have fire alarms with batteries, the traditional ones, test them regularly. The advice I understand from the LFB is to test at least once a month. If you go on holiday, on return from holiday, check them again. And so, the LFB does a lot of work around this, including advertising. And so it's really important that we realise simply fitting a smoke alarm isn't mission accomplished. We've got to make sure it's done properly, preferably the modern ones sealed in long life batteries, but checked regularly as well.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Hall, and it relates to delays on the Metropolitan line.
Thank you. I recognise that the Metropolitan line services has not been good enough and has frustrated many of its commuters. The recent delays were caused by track, signal and fleet issues. This is due to the age of the assets. The Metropolitan is one of the oldest lines, with some sections literally dating back to 1863. This is why, despite government cuts, Transport for London is investing £5.4 billion on the 4 lines modernisation programme, which will transform the Metropolitan, Circle, District and Hammersmith and City lines. Once complete, it will provide 27% more capacity on the Metropolitan line, with more frequent and reliable services to millions of customers. The new signalling system will begin to operate towards the end of 2018, which will improve performance on part of the line, with full completion by 2023. In the short term, TfL is taking action to improve reliability. Performance improvement plans are in place, which it is hoped will deliver significant improvement in the coming weeks and months. The London Underground maintenance team is replacing the track and drainage system, which is due to finish at the end of the year. This will improve the performance of the service run through this area. Track and signal issues between Finchley Road and Baker Street have also seriously affected services. The issues are caused by track being below the waterline and from a Thames water leakage above ground. The wet conditions interfere with the signalling equipment and cause it to fail. The water leak was fixed this week, which should improve performance. To make matters worse, in January of this year, a cable fault at Finchley Road caused performance issues. This will be replaced later this year. In the meantime, the track and signals team continue to closely monitor the assets and carry out urgent repairs. These short-term measures will help improve performance, while the 4 lines modernisation programme will deliver longer-term improvements in capacity and reliability. Thank you for raising this at Mayor's question time. Until the modernisation of the Met line is complete, I'll continue to push TfL to do everything it possibly can to minimise disruption for customers.
Thank you, Mayor. It is a shame that I've had to bring this to you. Unfortunately, I didn't get a response for 41 days on the letter that was sent to TfL. I'm glad that you're accepting that the status quo is unacceptable, because it really is. There are those serious problems. I'm getting daily reports back from residents. I've got a local councillor, Duncan Flynn, who is getting lots of complaints from local residents. Given that you've just said that the signalling problems aren't going to be finished for 5 years, what do you suppose I should be saying to residents in Harrow and Hillingdon, etc.? What are they supposed to do?
Well, I'll explain in my answer. I don't want to read it out again. I mean, these are quite complex modernisation programmes, but we're not waiting until 2023. I've said it in my answer, which you can forward on to your residents and commuters, the timelines between now and 2023, and we're hoping to get progress from now with the improvements, fixing the leak, improvements in relation to the line, and so hopefully commuters will start seeing improvements sooner rather than later. But I can't hide from the fact some of the equipment on this line date back to 1863. Even I as Mayor can't be blamed for things dating back to 1863, although some will try, I'm sure.
Well, I'm sure you'll find a way of blaming your predecessor, because he gets the blame.
Well, actually,
for
I'm pleased you raised this.
So, I'll tell you what, Mr Mayor, would you like to take this opportunity to apologise to the Metropolitan line users, especially those in Hillingdon and Harrow, who have constant problems getting to work?
Yeah, can I apologise profusely, Chair, for the inaction from the previous Mayor over 8 years. His failure to invest in TfL, agreeing to £700 million worth of cuts on an annual basis, while at the same time increasing fares by more than 42%. I apologise. It will take us some time to improve these lines. It's not good enough, and that's why I was pleased that the Assembly member raised this question today, because it meant I chased up TfL. But you're right, it's frustrating, because every day when a commuter reaches the station or checks on their app, they're not sure the certainty getting from home to work. They're late to work, can cause problems at work, and I'm frustrated. And I've seen some of the examples on social media about commuters being inconvenienced. It's not good enough in one of the best cities in the world, which is why, in the meantime, until we have the modernisation, I'll keep an eye on this. As I said in my answer, I thank you for raising this. I mean, I'll make sure that TfL doesn't wait until 2023, and hopefully commuters will see some respite sooner rather than later, but it is deeply frustrating for many commuters.
Well, thank you, and I will continue to bring up issues
Please.
that residents are cross about. But in the meantime, perhaps you could have a word with TfL, because had they answered this question in the first place, 40 odd days ago, then I wouldn't have had to have bothered you with it. Thank
Well,
you.
Chair, can I just follow that up? It's not good enough. And can I follow that up and get back to you about why that happened?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Desai, and it relates to Sapphire Unit staffing.
Thank you for your question. The officers who undertake investigations in complex areas such as sexual offences, domestic abuse and child protection do one of the most challenging jobs. On behalf of Londoners, I'm very grateful for their dedication and commitment. You're right to raise again the concern about officers' caseloads. We know there's been an increase in the reporting of these offences. Some of this is linked to increased confidence by the public to report these offences. This, however, impacts on policing at a time of reducing resources. We know that reports of rape have increased by 20% in the year to February 2018 when compared to the same period in the previous year. Over the same period, sexual offences have increased by 8.5% and domestic abuse violence with injury has increased by 2%. The recently published Violence Against Women and Girls strategy gives a commitment to work with the Met to review the workload of officers involved in violence against women and girls cases to ensure they have the time and resource they need to deliver the right response. I'm pleased the Met are already acting to improve the way it responds to these crimes and support their officers to do the best possible job. The new BCU model will also bring sexual offences officers into local policing teams, which means rape investigators will work closely alongside colleagues specialising in domestic abuse. These proposed changes are designed to provide a more coordinated and victim-focused service to survivors. The Pathfinder have shown us that the changes in safeguarding under the BCU model will reduce the caseloads individual officers manage. I know that the process of borough mergers is challenging, but this is a clear benefit of moving to the new model. The MPS are also recruiting more detectives through the direct entry programme, which will bring extra capacity to support those existing officers who carry out these important roles. But the pressure on officers has to be seen in the context of increasing demand and reducing resources. I'm doing what I can to compensate, putting an extra £110 million into policing next year, but the government have to accept their responsibility to properly fund our police, particularly those working with some of the most vulnerable people in our city.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. And I'm glad you talked about the government taking responsibility, because surely isn't it the case that the government's unjustifiable cuts have resulted in fewer police officers in London, meaning that detectives that we do have are required to do more work that is recommended by both national policing guidelines and the Met's own guidelines. Indeed, this morning there was a report issued by HMI CFRS, the Inspectorate, on police effectiveness, which amongst many critical observations talked about the effect of cuts in police forces, very specifically about, quote, a national crisis, unquote, in terms of shortage of detectives, 5,000 short in England and Wales, with 1 in 5 detective deaths empty. I note what you said about the Met increasing, recruiting more detectives. Again, the National Police Chiefs Council found that the increasing caseload creates an inability to offer a quality service to witnesses and victims. This is a stark warning from a country's top police officers that there's a real risk that high officer caseloads across the UK are leading to a worse service for victims of crime. The Met's own Sapphire team should be managing 15 cases, according to national guidelines. Current caseloads are 25 per officer. So given all this, how and why do you think that this government can continue to justify its decision to further cut the amount of money provided by the Home Office in London in real terms for next year?
I'm going to say, I'm not sure if we fully appreciate some of the challenges our city faces. Our city's population is growing, roughly speaking, 100,000 every year. Crime is becoming more complex. Victims are vulnerable, and the police have a difficult job. At a time when the demand on policing is increasing, the supply from the government for the policing budget is decreasing. It doesn't make sense. But what do the experts say? The National Police Chiefs Council, who you referred to, they've said that an increased caseload is having a detrimental impact on officers' ability to offer a quality service to victims and witnesses. And can I say this? I meet hard-working officers most days of the week. They're so stretched. They're incredibly professional. And I worry about a time when we've got difficulties recruiting detectives. We've tried to think of new innovative ways to get detectives in, entry level, and it's becoming harder and harder. And my worry is victims will receive a less good service, but more importantly, bad people will flee justice. They will not be caught by the police. They will not be arrested. They will not be charged. They will not be prosecuted. They will not get the sentence that's appropriate and not then be rehabilitated. So there's no upside. to the guts from the government, and they've really got to reconsider.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Russell, and it relates to the ultra-low emission zone.
Air pollution is one of the biggest issues faced in London today, and I'm determined to tackle it. And can I again thank you, Senator Russell, for your support on this issue. Since being elected Mayor, I've introduced the T-charge in Central London, brought forward the start date of the ULEZ in Central London to April 2019, and invested in cleaning up London's buses so that a third of all buses are cleaner Euro 6 vehicles. The ULEZ has an important role to play to help tackle London's toxic air, reduce emissions, and protect people from harmful pollution. The recent public consultation on our plans to expand the ULEZ and tighten the ULEZ received over 40,000 responses, and I'm delighted that so many Londoners responded to this consultation. Indeed, Chair, I understand that it's the largest ever response to a TfL consultation. In addition...
Mr Mayor, sorry, was that 14 or 40?
40,000, 40,000.
40. Thank you.
In addition, around 100 responses were also received from stakeholder organisations. TfL is currently analysing the responses and preparing a detailed report, which will be published on TfL's website. I'm keen to read the report, although I won't read all 40,000 responses, and this will inform my decision on whether to confirm the proposals with or without modifications. I'm grateful to everyone that has got involved in the consultation, including many stakeholder events.
Goodness, well, 40,000 is a massive response and really shows how much Londoners care about air pollution. Obviously, we can't speculate on what they've said, and I appreciate you can't go into any detail on that. But the Green Party group has recently commissioned YouGov to carry out a survey asking about your inner London ULEZ, and in particular, this is up to the North and South circulars, when it should come in. 10% of the respondents agreed with your proposal for 2021, but 42% of them wanted it to start much earlier. Will you consider these YouGov results alongside your latest ULEZ consultation response?
Well, I think there are deadlines in relation to consultations, and if you consider things outside the deadlines, there are criticisms and there are challenges that can be made. So I've got to be careful in relation to agreeing to accept things that are outside the consultation period. But let's wait and see what the report that's presented as a consequence of the consultation. I should just say this. I think it's welcome if it is the case that Londoners are trying to put more pressure on us to improve things faster and go further. That's fantastic. But it's worth just giving ourselves a small pat on the back, not celebrating too early about the progress we've made so far in just 2 years. We are going faster than originally planned. It does provide challenges, though, because nowhere else in the world has the ULEZ that we want. The scale is going to be massive. And so just a word of caution in relation to we've gone, we think, as fast as we possibly can in relation to 2019 for Central London, 2020 for all of London with the buses, coaches and lorries, 2021 in up to South and North Circular with everyone else. And so the short answer is I'm not sure if it's possible technically to go any faster, but I'll let me wait and see the responses.
Okay, and you're right to point out that London is moving faster, certainly than the government is moving, and we had 4 parliamentary select committees just last week condemning the government for their box-ticking response to tackling this public health emergency. Now, the select committees recommended bringing forward the date by which manufacturers must end the sale of conventional petrol and diesel cars from the government's 2040 target. I'm wondering if you will talk with the car manufacturers like Ford in Dagenham to accelerate their switch from fossil fuel vehicle production so that they're part of a clean air solution and so they create secure long-term work for their thousands of employees in their factory.
Well, it's just worth reminding ourselves that, fortunately or unfortunately, the cars that Londoners drive aren't all Ford and aren't all made. The engines aren't all made in Dagenham.
No, but this is about there are a lot of people a lot of Londoners work for Ford, and Ford produce tons of diesel engines, for the whole all across Europe. So can you use your influence to get them thinking towards the future to be switch earlier to making non-diesel vehicles in their factory so that you protect those jobs for Londoners?
Okay, well, I'm not sure exactly what's made now currently at Dagenham. My understanding is they're making Euro 6 engines, but I'm happy to go and look away at that, and you'll be aware Euro 6 is ULEZ compliant.
Of course. But for the future,
I know, just to reassure you, look, I'm always encouraging manufacturers, innovators, businesses to invest in the future, and that means clean energy, really important.
Okay. And then the government's got a clean air fund. It's a really small pot of money. It's, in transport terms, 220 million, and London has no access to it. But rather than asking for a slice of that very small pot of money, don't you think that we should be looking at the tools perhaps that we've got available to us already and seeing how we could use those? So I'm thinking here about traffic reduction through road pricing, which could tackle congestion, reduce pollution, and provide revenue to reinvest in walking, cycling, public transport, and helping people to switch to cleaner vehicles. Now, in your transport strategy, in Proposal 21, you say through TfL you will investigate road pricing. I understand Mike Brown is reporting back to you in 2020. Can you get him to report back sooner?
Well, I think we've got to be realistic where the technology is. I mean, I've not seen road pricing used on any scale anywhere in the world. We're already spending a huge amount of time, effort and energy and monies in the technology around ULEZ, 2019, 2020, 2021. But of course, TfL continues to explore technology all around the world. Drones, good example. Road pricing, you've given another one. We saw the horrific example last week of the fatal injury with autonomous vehicles, but we explore all technology, including how we can use mini consolidation centres in relation to deliveries of people's place of work and home.
Thank you very much. I'm totally out of time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Greens are now out of time. The next question is from Assembly Member Whittle and relates to the Probation Service.
Thank you for your question. The work of the Probation Services is essential for the safety of Londoners, and it's increasingly clear that the public have been severely let down by the government's decision to privatise this vital public service. Many people, me included when I was the Shadow Justice Secretary, joined experienced probation staff in warning the government that their ideological drive towards privatisation was reckless risk-taking with public safety. An underperforming community rehabilitation company, the CRC, means that offenders are not being properly rehabilitated, which means more crime for the police to deal with, increased harm to victims, and an additional financial burden for London. The findings of the inspection of London Probation Service in 2016 by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation was deeply alarming and showed that London's probation service was simply not working. I'm continuing to call for greater resourcing and responsibility to ensure these services are fit for purpose and drive down reoffending. The latest inspection of the CRC by Her Majesty's Inspector of Probation was published on the 8th of March. It did not paint a picture of it being perfect, but it did paint a picture of improvement in terms of performance. However, these improvements are from a very low baseline of 2016.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I would take it from that you would agree with me that this is something that should be a government or a state function and not a private one. I think it is extraordinary that we've reached a situation where it's been half privatised and yet at the same time the government's ended up bailing them out. It is disastrous. Back in 2016, when you were commenting on that original report, you said that you would continue to make the case to government for devolution of probation to City Hall. And I wondered how have you put that case in, the past 14 months?
Thanks for your question. I mean, so I met recently, it's fortuitous your question, the Lord Chancellor, the Justice Secretary, I think last week, to discuss the issue of devolution and where we go from here. The bad news is the contracts the government signed with these companies are for a number of years. And so the government, I think the current CRC contract ends in 2022. And so in the meantime, the Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime meets regularly with the company that have got the contract, MTC Novo. The question comes whether we, with the government or by ourselves, are in charge of commissioning the CRC contract. But even that wouldn't apply for post-2022. And you and I are worried about what happens now. And so, and by the way, we warned the government of this. I mean, it's a classic case of, we warned them, long contracts, real problem, even on payment by results. The key thing now, I think, is in the meantime to work with the company that's got the contract for them to improve their game. That means, I'm afraid, the government, again, bailing out a private company because one of the issues is lack of resources. skilled, experienced, dedicated probation staff leaving the service, and that's a real challenge. We can do our bit in relation to helping the government on electronic monitoring, female offending, dealing with the persistent offenders. But you're right, unless there's a real change from the government, in the short term, there's not a lot we can do as London government, which is frustrating for us, because as I said in my answer, if somebody's not rehabilitated, it means they commit another offence. We all suffer.
Oh, exactly, but also given that we've got a rise in violent crime at the moment, this is even more important. I'm very, very alarmed. I wonder whether you could comment, Mr. Mayor, to hear that actually as of this month, the private company started co-running nighttime supervision in probation hostels. And the private companies have been allowed to employ unvetted staff for the first 2 months of the contract. And Unison, I think, has said that this is, gambling with public safety. What do you actually understand by unvetted staff, first of all? And what is your comment on that?
Well, I wonder, Mr. Mayor, whether or not that's in your purview.
Well, I think
he's asking you, what do you understand by something which the GLA isn't responsible for?
Well, I think if I understood it correctly, I think the Islamist was bearing in mind my responsibility for safety.
Okay.
I think he was alluding to it.
Unvetted staff in hostels in London. Yeah.
Yes. So because it does affect us all. I mean, the problem is this. I mean, the reason why it's so frustrating the way the government's botched the probation contracts is all of us are affected by it. And so you can't silo the criminal justice system, the criminal justice service. And so the consequence could be companies taking on staff who haven't had the proper checks done, aren't properly experienced, not sure of the training they receive, forget on the work training, being in charge of people who could be vulnerable but also could be a risk. That should be a source of concern for us. And this is why, by the way, this is not, neither you or I come at this for ideological reasons. I suspect we come probably different in relation to the spectrum of nationalisation versus privatisation. We come at it on a pragmatic basis. We're saying, look, the consequence is Londoners' safety. And that's why it beggars belief, in the interest of ideology, a Justice Secretary goes down this road, and my prediction, the taxpayer will pick up the pieces, because the way it's been run now for profit is not the way to run a criminal justice system.
Well, I mean, they already have been picking up the pieces, from what I can see, with these companies. But, I mean, it's not necessarily actually just a pragmatic thing, in the sense that, to an extent it is ideological, if I may say, in the sense that some things we think government should do, and the market can't handle everything. Neither should it. Okay,
it's good to see your conversion, Peter.
No, it's always been the position, as opposed to these guys. But could I just therefore end by asking again, this main point about devolving, I know you say that there are contracts that go up to 2020, I totally understand that, but the point has really got to be consistently made all the way along, that actually this should be the end result, that we've lumbered with these things, but this should be the end result, that we should handle probation. You being in charge of the police, it should be under you too.
Yeah, can I say on that, Chair? I think the Islamic member is, and this will be recorded, I'm sure, absolutely right on this issue in relation to this, because it's not joined up. So we're in charge of policing to an extent in London, but then it leaves us when it comes to the prosecution, the courts, and it's not with us again when it comes to rehabilitation. Who picks up the pieces? It's the police. And so that's why my message to the Lord Chancellor, I'm not being indiscreet because these meetings should be done in private, but this bit is no state secret, is the more devolution to London, the more devolution to those nearer where decisions are taken, I think the better the outcome. On a whole host of issues, sometimes you're right, it's done actually for reasons of sensibleness. Actually, the state should be the person responsible for the safety of its citizens, should be the person responsible for the prosecution of those responsible for a crime. The state should be the people responsible for rehabilitating and punishing those guilty of a crime as well. But also the state should be those who make sure there's a proper care given to those who either leave custody or those who've been given a sentence by a judge that needs and requires supervision. And I don't think this is something that people should make a profit from. The profit should be greater public safety, not dividends to shareholders.
Well, thank you for that comprehensive answer.
Assembly Member Devonish.
Mr Mayor, you will recall when the last Home Secretary, now the Prime Minister, brought in police and crime commissioners, the direction of travel inferred in much of the discussion at the time was that probation services would follow on. And obviously you're the PCC in terms of London. Did you make that point to the Justice Secretary?
In relation to the privatisation of probation?
Yes.
No, I said it's a mad idea. I've got the lines I said. Basically, I said you've got a professional probation service. You should be invested in them, not privatising them. The idea that a contract that's payment by results with companies who've got no experience supervising dangerous offenders, some of them are, should get these contracts based upon a payment by results model was unwise. I predicted there'd be companies not able to do it properly, leading to risks with public safety. I predicted that at the end of the day, politicians would be held accountable, not the private companies, and lo and behold, it gives me no great pleasure in saying I told you so.
I was hoping for a bit of political non-partisanship. Obviously, this is an issue, a problem. I think we can all agree on that. What I was hoping that you, as the Mayor, would look to help grasp the problem, and we agree it is a problem, and potentially go back both to the private contractor and to government and suggest a pilot solution, because we can all make party political points, Mr Mayor, and be anti-privatisation, but this is an issue. We all agree it's a problem. You are the Mayor of London, as we often say to you. Would you work in partnership with government and this private contractor and try and come up potentially maybe with a geographic single borough pilot, because we need to actually sort this problem out rather than a crow that it's a problem, please?
I'm always disappointed to answer a question where somebody's written a question without realising what the facts are. But let me try and deal with the question asked by the Assembly member. So, my Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime meets regularly with the Chief Executive of MTC Nova, who run the London CRC. Someone say an example of working sensibly with the private company. There's a meeting planned for next week. They meet regularly. One of the things they discuss is performance issues, working constructively. In addition, my officials have recently set up performance meetings with the MOJ to ensure we're not waiting for inspection reports to highlight and respond to any issues. Additionally, the London CRC has a representative on the London Crime Reduction Board that I chair. Additionally, they've seconded a probation officer to the London Gang Exit Service, which we fund, and seconded an officer working with Prevent and Terrorism Act branch of the Met Police. MOPAC also worked closely with the CRC on a number of the specific projects. So far be it from us taking our toys away and not playing ball. We're working really constructively and very hard with this private company, but that doesn't take away from the fact that at its cause is a flawed privatisation process with not enough resources and non-experts in charge of this. And that's why we need a fundamental change and a shift from the government. And by the way, the Assembly member May will say we all agree there's a problem, we all agree this was a mistake. The government doesn't.
Well, I think when we're trying to solve a problem, one thing I'd love you to answer, and please write to me, Mr Mayor, rather than answering now, because it's a serious point, and I'm not trying to make party political point about this. I'm trying to actually solve the problem, as I'm sure my colleague who asked the question is. What the question is, you have to ask with government of any party in the civil service and in terms of remodelling a service is, how and what would you do differently? And if you could reflect on that, please. I don't expect an answer now and another attack on privatisation. If you can answer how and what would you do differently with the Deputy Mayor, with government, I believe my government is very reasonable and I believe we'll get to a solution.
Well, Chair, let me answer that now. So I can answer that now in relation to how we can improve the service. So if, for example, the government was to say to me, to MOPAC, that we will give you responsibility for commissioning the service with sufficient resources, we think we could do a better service than the government is doing with the current company. That could mean the government having to pay compensation to the privatised company that's got a contract till 2022. If the government really is interested in public safety and not willing to take a risk, then they wouldn't want to do so. But there are things they can do now. What we can't do is pretend that we can somehow will these things better. And as much as I'd like to do so, we can't. And so even if it was to be a co-commissioning role in the future, there's got to be proper control from us in relation to co-commission and equal partnership, and it's got to be backed up by resources. Even the best private company in the world can't run a service as complex as this with not enough resources. That's why they'll cut corners by employing staff who aren't trained, aren't supervised because they're cheaper. And it needs proper investment from the government.
Sorry to interrupt, but I've got 3 minutes. So could I ask you, can I ask you two things? One, to stop the drill going off, please,
Yes,
Mr. Mayor.
we're
and two, to actually reflect on what our discussion and perhaps actually come up with a proposal to government, because I think that we all agree that we do need to improve this.
Well, I think the ball isn't in my court, Chair. The ball is in the government's court.
You're the Mayor of London, sir.
We've made recommendations to the government. We've made suggestions to the government. And the experience I've had from the MOJ in particular in relation to this issue, not other issues, this issue, is we aren't going to see devolution to me, the Mayor, as I've been reminded, anytime soon. But if the Assembly member has contacts with the government, influence with the government, he thinks they're reasonable, I'm really happy to see the fruits of that.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Duval will be asking Assembly Member Eshalomi's question on the victims of weapons crime and serious youth violence.
Thank you, Assembly Member Duval, for this important question. Let me start by saying that every life lost to violence is a tragedy, especially when it's the life of a young person. Every single death is one too many. We've seen a worrying rise in this violence across England and Wales, and I'm determined to keep doing everything in my power to address the rise in knife crime in London. I'm very aware of the good work that St Giles Trust do in many London boroughs, and I'm pleased to be able to support the development of their initiatives through continued funding. MOPAC has already provided £1.2 million towards clinically embedded youth workers in the 4 London major trauma centres between 2015 and 2018, supporting nearly 1,000 young victims of violence, 2/3 of whom had been stabbed. Our funding has supported St Giles Trust in partnership with Red Thread to provide the service at the Royal London Hospital that Assembly Member Eshalomi mentions. I've already committed through my knife crime strategy to invest in a further £1.4 million to not only retain youth workers in major trauma centres, but also, like has been suggested, to expand into A&Es. And just last week I announced a further £640,000 to support this. This investment is part of the £7 million we're investing in knife and crime gang initiatives across London, in addition to the £50 million I've committed for the police to increase their activity. We've also announced a brand new £45 million for local communities and charities to help young people fulfil their potential. We're doing everything we can in London to not only be tough on knife crime, but tough on the causes of knife crime. The government's own stats show this is a national problem, and it's time the government started providing national solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of the investment that you're providing across there, some of that, in terms of your conversations with those that are advising you, when do you expect that, because that's truly preventative type measures, when do you expect that to have an effect? And at the same time, in talking to the Metropolitan Police Service and maybe other agencies, do you not think we need to be preparing for some emergency package of short-term measures that we may wish to undertake before as spring turns to summer? Hot nights, World Cup, capacity for young and old to be hurt by violence and killed by knife crime.
Yeah, just so you know, I mean, thanks for raising that point. But that's one of the reasons why we fast-tracked some of the monies to go out. We announced them last week, because we can't wait until the normal processes of government, I mean City Hall government, to take place. We need the money out. City Hall, we need work being done. And so the first tranche went out, I think this week or last week, and we announced publicly where this money was going, including to groups who are what we call hard to reach, groups that aren't usually successful at applying for, let alone getting funding. So that money's gone out now. It's left City Hall. What we're doing now is working with particularly those young people in parts of London who don't know how to organise events or apply for funding, to help them do so, including work with councils. Some councils, we're not going to subsidise councils for services they could fund themselves, but if they can't or they need support, we'll help them. But they may know young people where there's an issue. I'll give you just one example in relation to the recent events in Camden. We know that some people, but I'm not excusing criminality, so we mustn't confuse the two. We know there are some young people in that part of London who feel excluded from society, excluded from mainstream provision, and so we're working with the council we're trying to see what facilities we can provide straight away, not waiting for the bureaucratic process. And so we've got to get these monies out sooner rather than later. So this money is addition to the money we've previously announced, and we'll get out as soon as we can in relation to prevention. In relation to enforcement, just to reassure you, all our eggs aren't in the prevention basket. Prevention is very, very important. Yep. But you're right, there are already now young people, including young adults, doing bad things, and we need tough enforcement with them. And that's why I was keen to give the police additional funding to compensate for the cuts, but also to say, listen, by the way, 15 million of this is just towards addressing the issue of knife crime. And so some of the things we'll be giving you details of, the work's started happening, but we've not bottomed it out yet, is increasing the amount of Operation Sceptre taking place across our city. You'll be aware, when we first announced it last year, 80 officers once a month. They went up to twice a month. And so seeing if we can scale that up, seeing if we can have, rather than officers working overtime, working their socks off, recruiting more officers to do so. But you're right, it takes time to recruit officers. What's going to happen now? Some of it may be overtime in the short term. How can we use technology straight away? Automatic name recognition plates, you know, the moped-related crimes to do with some of this stuff, but also CCTV as well. So we're getting this money out as soon as we can. We're not waiting for the usual delays that inevitably happen with the bureaucracy to take place. And you're right, there is an urgency in relation to both prevention and enforcement.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Twycross.
Thank you. Croydon Council's been doing everything they can to tackle knife crime, which has been a particular issue in the borough, and has committed £250,000 to support young people in the borough to make positive choices. The local police force and the council have also run an engagement campaign which saw police and council go into the shopping centres in Croydon to talk directly to the community. The Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime, Sophie Linden, visited the borough last month and has praised the strength of their knife crime plan. How will you ensure that best practice, such as the work that is being carried out in Croydon, is shared between boroughs?
Well, can I just say, I mean, Croydon, when you look at the boroughs across London, does have a large number of knife crimes taking place. A number of boroughs do. And we think, actually, the work Croydon Council are doing is very impressive. There's been a reduction, actually, in knife crime in Croydon in the recent past, in the last year, which is, in the context of knife crime across the country going up, that is quite impressive. And it doesn't happen by itself. It happened because of the work you alluded to. Just give you mentioned some of the examples of good practice which we've seen. They've established an independent advisory group for young people, launched a serious youth violence community forum, cracking down on retailers who are selling irresponsibly, which is a big issue for many of us going forward. And so the challenge for us is how we take what's best from there and replicate it across London. The short answer is there is a number of ways of doing so. One is the Justice Matters sessions on knife crime that Sophie chairs as the Deputy Mayor. I think the next one's tomorrow, and we'll be using some of this shared best practice. The other good thing is the leader of the council, Tony Newman, and others on Croydon Council are very happy to talk to other leaders, and they do. Some of the work we're doing on the London Crime Prevention Board will be sharing some of this best practice. But you're right, we've got to do so. Another way of sharing best practices is every borough now has a knife crime plan. And so the borough commanders who speak to each other on a regular basis will share the best practice taking place in their boroughs. Not to brag, but to say this is the way that you can nick the idea and run with it, and hopefully lead to us making some progress on tackling knife crime.
Thank you. And on Tuesday you announced £50,000 of funding to the Croydon BME Forum to provide activities for people affected by knife crime in Croydon. Do you agree that grassroots organisations are best placed to deliver knife crime initiatives?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Sarah Jones, one of the local MPs, has made that point forcibly to me, as is the council, which that we've got to make sure we go to the grassroots groups. They've got the credibility, they've got the access, and that's why the point I was making in answer to a previous question from Len. Often, not criticism, often the groups that get the funding are great, but they're the usual suspects. The more challenge for us is to reach groups who in the past haven't got funding, who do a great amount of work, and for them, just a small sum of money can make a massive impact. And so, of course, we'll be supporting grassroots groups in Croydon and across London as well.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Dismore.
The two young men who were stabbed to death and a third teenage victim who was hospitalised and lucky to be alive, all within half a mile of each other in Camden on the evening of the 20th of February. And the following day, you rightly called for a meeting with the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary to discuss knife crime, which in London started to rise 4 years ago under your predecessor. What was the outcome of your request? I believe you've seen the Home Secretary. Have you seen the Prime Minister? And what's happening at government level to support you?
So I had a meeting with the Home Secretary, with the other police and crime commissioners and the senior officers, and the Commissioner of the Met Police was there, I think, last week, the week before, to discuss the government's forthcoming serious violence strategy. And separately, as a response to my request for a meeting with the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister has asked the Home Secretary to meet with the Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime and myself. We'll take the Commissioner with us and the senior officer to discuss what we can do. The reason for my request for a meeting with the Prime Minister was this is a national problem. It was clear from the meeting last week, chaired by the Home Secretary, this isn't just a London problem. You speak to Manchester, you speak to Liverpool, you speak to West Midlands, you speak to other parts of the country, they're all seeing an increase in knife crime. What needs to happen is the government, I don't mean this in a critical way, but to get a grip of the various wings of government, the various silos, so we can work together. Not all of it is resources, some of it is resources. I'll give you just some examples on resources. DCMS could put pressure on the social media companies in relation to the concerns we've got on social media. They could do much, much more. The Department of Education could put pressure on some of the schools and Ofsted, some of the work taking place, not taking place in other schools to make progress there. PHSE, they could play a role there. We could see, for example, DOH playing a role in relation to mental health, and on and on and on. And it's for the Prime Minister to bring together all these various government departments and then to get different agencies across the country and PCCs and mayors as well. Now, I'm hoping that the meeting last week for the Home Sec was the start of a process of central government understanding this is a national problem and it requires national solutions.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Bailey.
Hello, Mr. Mayor. We talk about victims and the focus on young people, which is very fine, but I've met a lot of people now who've had their children murdered through a knife crime incident, and there's beginning to be a feeling that the parents and the communities left behind are being forgotten. Can you give us an idea how you and the GLA will do something about making sure projects that work with parents and communities, specifically with parents, I think I'm saying, can receive some of this funding? Because again, they're beginning to feel that they're not part of the conversation anymore when it comes to victims.
Thank you for your question. So a couple of things. Firstly, I'd be disappointed if families felt that the family liaison officers weren't in touch with them when they've been a bereaved family. I suspect you mean the long-term people who were victims a few years ago. And they
they're saying the initial contact with police is fairly good, but beyond that... I
understand, that's what I thought you meant, yes.
Drift away.
Can I just say, you will know this, but for those that don't, one of the most powerful things when you speak to young people is a bereaved mum or dad doing the assembly or explaining the consequences of knife crime. And so more and more charities now, more and more people doing youth work are being led by bereaved mums and dads and bereaved family members because it's so powerful, but also it helps mum or dad or bereaved family member as well. I don't like using the horrible word closure, but it helps them deal with some of the issues. If it's the case that you're in touch with a bereaved family member who wants to get involved and currently isn't, please let us know, because we can then get them in touch with a relevant group that already exists, unless they want to set up their own group. But some of this money we've announced is for these new groups. Some of them are from our bereaved family members.
I think, Mayor, just because time's so brief, I think we are talking about a separate set of people who don't want to do that or are incapable of doing that because of the situation they find themselves in. And I just want there to be not only a focus on the young people involved, but also the parents involved, because they have an impact in the community that could be positive if they feel like they're being dealt with properly. And that's why I want the focus to be on this.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Desai, and it relates to child protection. I'm awfully sorry. I have jumped a question. It's Assembly Member Duval again, and it relates to the nighttime economy and women's safety.
Thank you for your question eventually. I want every woman and girl to be safe and to feel safe, wherever they are in our great city, at all times of the day and night. London is one of the safest cities, not only to work, but to go out at night. But it's simply unacceptable that for some women and girls, harassment and unwanted attention has become an expected part of their daily lives. My refreshed Violence Against Women and Girls strategy makes tackling sexual harassment in public spaces a priority. We must do more to encourage the reporting of any form of sexual harassment, and I hope Assembly members will join me today in sending a strong message to Londoners. If you're the victim or a witness of this kind of abuse, report it. The police and other agencies are ready to help. The more sexual harassment that's reported, the more we'll be able to put together a picture of where women are most vulnerable and, in turn, where perpetrators can be targeted most effectively. As part of this, my plans for a Women's Night Safety Charter calls for licensed premises to have trained staff who know how to be vigilant with regards to women's safety at night. This includes a duty to capture information and to report it to the police where appropriate. I'm encouraging local authorities and licensed premises to sign up to the principles of this new charter and to spread best practice through my Borough Champions network. There are also many schemes and organisations that do great work to combat the harassment of women, as well as to encourage victims and witnesses to report it. These include Ask for Angela, the Report It to Stop It campaign, Good Night Out, Best Bar None, the Purple Flag Scheme and the Business Crime Reduction Partnerships. I'm pleased to hear of the work that her centre has been doing in Greenwich and beyond. I welcome any steps that strengthen our ability to reduce harassment, and the work they're doing match my commitments and ambitions in my strategy. I'm sure my Night Czar, Amy LeMay, and MOPAC official will be happy to meet with her centre team, not only to learn more, but to explore ways of working together.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, and I welcome it in the voluntary nature in terms of the Charter. But I think while we're doing the voluntary work and exposing this aspect and potential crimes that go on from it, I think we need to start to think about how do we reinforce this by changes in the licensing laws. Would you be prepared to lead a campaign where we seek from government a change in the licensing law, making it mandatory as part of the licence that there is a clear plan in making sure that licensees, it's in their interest, protects their customers, that they have to report the crimes because there's a lack of reporting on some licensees, reporting crimes that occur on their premises, and actually, as you said, seek to stop unwanted harassment that can lead to sexual assaults and indeed rape. That's the seriousness of it. At every level of every polling undertaken that's come back from the Drink Aware, YouGov has said substantially a number of people have experienced poor behaviour and, in some cases, breaking the law in terms of nights out. We need to encourage people to do it. I think we're doing it voluntary, but we do need to strengthen the licensing legislation. I think if we move to do that, we need to start talking to Parliament and our parliamentary colleagues, and you need to talk to your other policing and crime issues. Reduce resources for police means we need to manage risk. We need to move to that prevent agenda as much as possible. By doing this and strengthening the licensing laws, putting I think rightly the onus on owners of properties and those who are managing licensed properties, a guide of what's expected. And then I think we can make women much safer in some of these environments.
Okay, can I say, I'm very happy to write to the relevant Secretary of State. And let me tell you why. I'm not sure if, because of, I can't speak for everyone, because of our age and our profile, we may not realise the amount of criminality, harassment, short criminality that takes place in some of these premises. And it's just worth me saying this, which is the evidence, which is predators choose certain premises if they know there's a lax arrangement. And that's why, that's the context of your question and the evidence we have. And this is why the work that those behind the strategy, the Violence Against Women and Crime strategy, Sophie Linden, working closely with Claire Waxman, the Labour Councils, London Councils, the London Crime Reduction Board, and others, Amy LeMay did so much work listening to victims of this harassment and criminality. And so what we were told was, even very good local authorities, when it came to licensing, were saying, well, the legislation is such, if we impose draconian conditions, we get challenged through the courts and we lose. And so your suggestion that we ask government to change the law to give local authorities the tools they need when it comes to licensing has got to be the best way to do this. And so I'll take up the suggestion and I'll write to the Secretary of State and send you a copy of the representations that I make to him or her. In the meantime, we'll carry on the best practice stuff that we're doing. And by the way, and it's a story that you all enjoy, I hope, is I spoke to a young person 2 weeks ago when we launched our campaign, and she told me that she'd been in a bar and was being treated in a way that she shouldn't be treated, but she used the Ask the Angela device. She went to the loo, she's very distressed, went to the loo, was distressed by what this bloke had done, saw in the loo the sign saying, if you're being treated in a certain way that's inappropriate, ask the bar staff for somebody called Angela, and they'll take action. And she did what was advised, and the bar staff took action, kicked this guy out. And so this is an example of things that are happening voluntarily and stuff, and we need more of this in the meantime before we get the legislation change that we need.
Thank you very much.
Could I now ask members, please, to agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9b in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 1.1h in order to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed. Thank you. Right, and we now go to the next question, and indeed it is Assembly Member Desai on child protection.
Thank you for your question. I know that you and the Assembly share my concern about progress being made to improve the protection of children by the MPS. The findings of the 2016 report into child protection at the Met by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services was deeply troubling, finding that too many children have been let down when they're most in need. The findings were simply unacceptable. Immediately after the report was published, I established a multi-agency child protection oversight group, chaired by my Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Sophie Linden, to provide a clear line of scrutiny and oversight on this important issue. This group is meeting as we speak for their 9th meeting and will continue to meet every 6 weeks to review the strength of the Met response. The Inspectorate has praised this level of oversight and has noted progress made by the Met to date. In the latest Q4 report, the Inspectorate recognised the significant change that has taken place at a strategic level at the Met, with there now being a named Chief Officer lead. There is now a team dedicated to checking and reporting on the nature and quality of decision-making in child protection cases. The Inspectorate also recognised a significant change in the availability of data for officers and staff on child protection performance. However, the report concluded that consistently good outcomes for children in London are still not being achieved, and in my view, that's simply not good enough. As the Inspectorate have recognised in their reports, the scale of change needed, the size and complexity of the Met, as well as the increasing demand and volume of offences against children, have made the implementation of changes particularly challenging. For all recommendations to be embedded throughout the organisation, force-wide training, a shift in culture, and ultimately resource will be required. And I don't need to remind Assembly members of the resources challenges we are facing. There is still a long way to go to deliver the kind of improvements we want to see, and I'm concerned about the slow pace of improvements. HMICFRS will be coming back in 12 months' time. We would all expect to see significant improvements by then.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions. I know we already talked about basic command units earlier this morning, but and we on the police committee will continue to monitor the implementation of and the rollout of the BCUs across London. But in terms of this specific area of child protection, how will changes to police structures work out? Changes to police structures arising from the move to basic command units work out?
So the changes in the basic command units are aimed at improving performance and outcomes in this area of work in particular. So there'll be introduction of new teams, new working practices, for example, providing a better response when there's missing children. There will be more and better trained officers working within these BCUs focusing on this work, and larger teams will provide greater flexibility in the deployment of resources to meet both critical incidents and longer term demands. And also the Deputy Mayor and I will have raised this with the Commissioner. We met her last week on this and discussed this issue, and we'll carry on raising this with her directly as well.
Right. And my second question, you talk quite understandably in very general terms in your answer to my main question, but is it reasonable to discuss setting targets in this area with the Commissioner? In particular, the Inspectorate found that almost 90% of cases either required improvement or inadequate. Will you consider asking the Commissioner for a timescale as to when that percentage should significantly decrease by? You talked about a 12-month period, but can we be more specific? Targets, would that help?
Yeah, I mean the report from the Inspectorate did recognise the huge complexities in relation to turning this around. These are complex issues. It will take some time. As I said in my answer, we expect to see significant change by the time of the next report. But you're right, we've got to make sure there's progress being made. So what the Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime is doing at the London Child Protection Improvement Oversight Group as we speak is discussing this issue, how we monitor. So processes will be developed to provide key information as to how well the Met is doing, and data will be collated over appropriate timescales in order that progress can be measured. And I'm happy to update you and the committee on progress made.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, Assemblymember Copley on London-wide social lettings agency.
Thank you for your question. As we know, building new genuinely affordable housing is crucial in helping private renters in London. But we also know that building new homes will take time and will require government support for it to build at the scale that we need. You're right to reference my manifesto. The next part of it, in relation to not-for-profit lettings agencies, said to end rip-off fees for renters. Since 2016, we've made significant progress on ending these rip-off fees. Along with a broad coalition of others, we successfully lobbied the government to ban letting agents' fees across the board. However, even though it was announced in 2016's autumn statement, no real progress made on this issue, and the government's actually conceded to the landlords by saying actually the amount of deposit can be as high as 6 weeks rent, which would be as much as £2,000, which is very worrying. When the bill eventually becomes law, the ban on tenants' fees that we've long campaigned for will be welcomed by many Londoners. Though by different means, a key aim of social lettings agencies will have been achieved and will apply to private renters much more broadly. I continue to be supportive of local social lettings agencies. My new property portal, which my team has been developing over the last year, will launch later this spring. This will operate London-wide, and alongside its role of promoting affordable homes for Londoners to rent and buy, it will also support councils' work by allowing them to advertise their social letting agents' properties, their social lettings agency properties more widely.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. And I do think it's a bit of a shame that the government seems to be dragging its feet on the ban on lettings agency fees, which I think they've announced a couple of times now, and they've published a draft bill but haven't actually implemented anything yet. But I don't think that the advantages of having some sort of London-wide lettings agency are restricted to the issue of fees. In fact, I raised this very issue with you precisely a year ago today in relation to the government's right to rent laws, which have unfortunately led to, I think, an increase in racial discrimination when it comes to lettings agencies and landlords and tenants. And I did ask you whether you'd agree that the persistence of race discrimination within the private rented sector is an indicator of the continued need for a social lettings agency, and you agreed with that. And you also said that you would continue to go ahead. Is it still your intention to go ahead and create a London-wide lettings agency?
So because of the government's agreement to ban lettings agencies' fees, what we're going to do in the short term and medium term is use the portal to amplify those social lettings agencies that boroughs have already set up. At this stage, we don't think there's a need to set up our own London social lettings agencies. What we are going to do is, because we'll amplify what the boroughs are doing, that in effect we're hoping will become pan-London. And so the portal will be the go-to place if you want to, not just buy a property, but rent a property as well. You'll be aware of the work we've done so far, more than 30,000 visitors to our name and shame database for rogue landlords as well. So the idea is to help those social lettings agencies do better. We've had some feedback, one or two aren't doing as well as they were hoping. And so it's really important that we help those that are there to be more successful and hopefully over a period of time cover all of London. The other unknown is we both agree that delay is not acceptable from the government, but once we finally get a situation where tenants haven't got to pay a fee, what impact that will have on estate agents generally.
Are you concerned that not only that this is taking quite a while, it seems, for the government to implement, but there's the potential for the government perhaps to give in to some lobbying from the lettings agent sector and come up with something that's watered down or not what they initially proposed? If that were to be the case, do you think you would still wish to pursue some sort of a London-wide lettings agency if the government failed to live up to what they've promised?
Oh, no, if the government breaks this promise as well, then of course I'll revisit my views on whether we have London-wide social aid agencies, whether we need to duplicate, in effect, what some others are doing. What we want to do is inadvertently put councils, social lettings agencies out of business. Levy can be used as well as to devolve funding and powers to city halls so that all Londoners, particularly those from diverse backgrounds, can access the skills they need to succeed. Apprenticeship data for the months following the introduction of the apprenticeship levy is limited, so it's too early to form a view on how the levies affected the diversity of London's apprenticeship workforce. The pre-levy data shows that London performed better than other regions in terms of the proportion of women and people from BAME groups starting an apprenticeship between 2015 and 16. Overall, though, London has historically had fewer apprenticeships starts than other regions.
Thank you. One of the main issues relating to diversity we found as on the Economy Committee was that actually the women and people from BME backgrounds sort of tended not to get the higher level apprenticeships. So I think that notwithstanding the sort of high numbers compared to the rest of the country, diversity does remain an issue in apprenticeships. One of the things that has been suggested was in a report published by the Young Women's Trust, Learning and Work Institute, Timewise and the Trust for London, which called for more flexible and part-time apprenticeships in order to increase diversity, which is something I've raised with you before. And you've previously said that you'd consider this, but the government rules state that they're only for use in exceptional circumstances. Given the need for the government to review how they approach apprenticeships in light of the issues with the apprenticeship levy, is this something that you would lobby the government to relax and encourage?
Yes. Why don't I make representations to the relevant minister on this issue? I mean, the point you made last time we discussed this was the reluctance, nervousness of somebody to come forward and say, you know what, can I have a part-time apprenticeship because a full-time doesn't work for me? And I think we need to make it easier for them to access a part-time apprenticeship. And so I think an indirect consequence of this only being exceptional is fewer women may well apply for an apprenticeship. So let me make representations to the Minister about this.
Thank you very much. And I welcome the new digital talent programme that you've recently launched to increase diversity in tech and digital careers. How will you measure its success?
So thank you for that. I mean, so it's really important we do measure how well or not well it's doing. So the evaluation will be independent. It will include the number and diversity of learners engaged in training, the level of successful employment outcomes, the level of engagement with industry, the level of support provided to teachers and trainers. And the idea is for the evaluation to provide an insight on whether the programmes address some of the key challenges we as a city face, and that includes digital skills shortages, and also supporting skills providers with sustainability of their projects. And obviously we want to make sure that a sufficient number of women and those from BME backgrounds are taking advantage of the digital talent programme.
Thank you. And the programme's part funded through the European Social Fund. With Brexit looming large, is there a risk to the funding of this initiative, and does it mean we'll be less likely to see programmes like this in the future?
Yeah. I mean, the funding for this runs out in March 2020. One of the questions those who want a celebration of our leaving the EU have got to answer is how are we going to make sure we have these sorts of programmes in the future when we've left the EU?
Indeed. Thank you very much.
On this part of the agenda, Assembly Member Gavron, a question on delivering homes for London.
As you know, the government published for consultation a revised version of the NPPF on 5th of March. I'll be sending a full response to the government by the deadline of the 10th of May. It looks like the officials have read part of my draft on the plan, as some of the policies in the NPPF look very similar, which is good news. I set out new policies in my draft plan to increase development around stations and town centres and to increase the contribution of housing supply from small sites. I introduced the Agent for Change policy and strengthen protection of Greenbelt. All of these are in the draft NPPF, which we welcome. It's not all good news for London. I'm worried about their approach to viability in the NPPF. It does introduce greater transparency for assessments, which I welcome, but I'm concerned about their approach to enable developers to reduce affordable housing commitments after they've secured it. They've been secured through the planning process, and I'm worried we could have the reintroduction of a downward viability review, despite a similar measure being revoked only 2 years ago. We saw with Battersea Power Station what that can often lead to. I'm also unhappy about them taking the unprecedented step of specifying a 20% profit for developers, removing important flexibility from viability negotiations.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I too was very struck on reading it on how many of your London plan policies anticipate, really, the MPPF proposals. But there's one massive problem, in my view, which is that Mrs May she's taking personal responsibility for this, and she's shifting the blame onto councils for not increasing housing supply. And it's an irony almost. I mean, we all know that she's not going to reach that 300,000 target for homes being built per year across the country unless she provides the finance and the mechanisms for councils. And perversely, she's almost shackling local authorities by not allowing them to lift the HRA borrowing cap at a time when interest rates continue to be so low. So my question to you would be, do you agree that she should be doing more to set councils free, to invest in the homes that Londoners need?
Well, look, we engage, contrary to the views, what some people may believe, we engage constructively with government, with officials and with ministers. And one of the things we shared with them, which they know, is if you look at house building since the 1920s, the amount of homes that the private sector builds is, roughly speaking, on average about 30,000, take or leave. The only times where there's been a big increase in homes built is where the state, national, local, regional governments play a role in supplementing homes built by the private sector. So if we're going to meet the needs of London, the government says, roughly speaking, 72,000. We say, roughly speaking, 66,000. But let's say, for argument's sake, it's about 70,000. If we're going to go from 30,000 to 70,000, and we know history tells us the private sector can't fill that void, the only alternative is councils, regional government, and the government, which is why it doesn't make sense, the government's reluctance to allow councils to build more homes, to remove the HRA limits, to give them powers in relation to allocation, compiling, bringing together land, changing the rules around CPOs, giving bigger grants to London and other parts of the country who could do a lot more with sufficient grants. It doesn't make sense at all. And so it's as if the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. And my point to the government when I meet with them, I make this point publicly as well as privately, is we want to help you meet the promises you've made. We want to help you actually keep this promise. It's in our interest to do so because Londoners need these homes. Councils are queuing up. They want to build homes. With sufficient resources, sufficient planning powers, they could do a huge amount. But they've got not one, they've got 1.5 hands tied behind their backs, and it's incredibly frustrating for them as well.
I agree with that. And in fact, what we know is that councils are actually giving planning permission for 9 out of 10 of the applications that come before them.
Well, can I say on that point, it's a really important point. You see, there was this myth that I think we've bust now, which is that the problem is the lack of permissions being granted. And to give the Chancellor credit, I made this point to him when I met with him before his last budget. And I said, hold on a sec, in London alone, there were roughly speaking 200,000 permissions granted, there are a bit more than that, granted where homes haven't been built. Some haven't even been started. And so it's not the council's fault. And to give the Chancellor credit, he's asked Oliver Letwin to do a piece of work to find out why all these permissions have been granted by councils, yet homes aren't being built. And so action's got to be taken there as well.
Are you optimistic about Letwin's review? He's just issued his interim letter, and I just wondered whether you clearly are lobbying him. Are you optimistic we're going to get what we want?
I was very impressed by his knowledge when we met on this subject recently. He was clearly on top of the facts. He's done his homework. Many of the points that I was going to make to him, he said to me in the opening. The first part of his review is what is a problem. The second part, which reports back in time for the Chancellor's autumn budget, is what we can do about it. So far, a positive report from me as far as Oliver Letwin's concerned, but clearly we'll have to wait and see what the recommendations are to address the issue of the numbers of homes given permission, but no action being taken. Unless in his recommendations he actually talks about resources being given, support being given to regional government and local government, I'm not really sure how else you can address the issue of the housing crisis in London and across the country.
Right, okay. I mean, just finally, in your London plan...
Yes,
have I got the time?
Actually, Assembly
I'm
Member
out of time,
Gavron,
okay.
you're out of time. Right. Well, thank you very much, Mr Mayor, for your answers. You've now reached the halfway point of your administration.
I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor. Check. I'd say I think you're wrong there. I think the half of 36 is not 2. Think about it.
Well, I need to. Is that one of those Radio 4 questions?
It's one of those, what's the half of 9 terms? And half of 9 terms is in 2 years.
OK, thank you, Mr Mayor. Right, now we go on to Part B. Will you agree the motion set out on the agenda that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? Thank you very much. Will you please note that on the matter of the GLA Members' Code of Conduct, that this is a joint decision with the Mayor of London, so will you agree to adopt the proposed revised Code of Conduct as set out in Appendix 1? Thank you. Right, now we've got a very long proposal which has to be dealt with unanimously. Hopefully I need only to say it once. Would you please reconfirm the agreement made at the annual meeting unanimously to disapply the proportionality rules where committee membership is not politically proportional in respect of the overall membership of the Assembly? This is in accordance with the provisions of Section 17 of the Local Government and Housing Act 1989, and to re-establish and allocate seats to the Fire, Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee for the remainder of the 2017-18 year on the basis set out in Appendix 1 to the report. And secondly, to confirm the membership of the committee as reflected in Appendix 1. And thirdly, to agree to confer the confirmation hearing functions set out under Section 60A and Schedule 4A of the GLA Act 1999 as amended, and as amended by the Policing and Crime Act 2017 on the Fire, Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee, with immediate effect, noting that the remaining functions conferred on the committee will be commenced on the 1st of April 2018 and will be the subject of further recommendations at the annual meeting on the 10th of May 2018. And accordingly, I will now call for nominations for the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Fire, Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee for the remainder of the 2017-18 year. So, firstly, can I have nominations for Chair, please? Yes. Is that seconded? Thank you. Any other nominations?
Sorry.
No. That you're another nominee. Unless you were seconding Assemblymember Hall.
Doing the chair at the moment.
Chair at the moment. Oh, sorry. Yes, I was jumping
Okay.
forward.
Are there any other nominations? Thank you. Assemblymember Duval?
I nominate Andrew Dismore for Vice Chair, formally.
So are there no
sorry,
other nominations for Chair?
In my rush to finish this meeting.
Okay. Well, that's easy then. Okay. Would you therefore please appoint Assemblymember Hall as Chairman for the remainder of the 2017-18 year? Don't know how many days it is, but there we are. Right, now nominations for Deputy Chair.
Thank you very much. I nominate Andrew Dismore as Deputy Chair.
Okay. Seconded. Thank you very much. Any other nominations? Right, thank you. Assemblymember Dismore is elected as Deputy Chair. I hope you have fun. Right.
You look pleased about that.
That is Andrew looking pleased.
Now, please, in relation to future meetings, will you agree, please, to use the 7th of June 2018 plenary meeting to hold a question and answer session with Mr Philip Colvin QC, former Chair of the Nighttime Commission, and Ms Amy Lame, Night Czar, to hold a question and answer session regarding London's nighttime economy. And under Section 61 of the GLA Act 1999, require the attendance of Ms Amy Lame, Night Czar, at the London Assembly meeting at 10 a.m. on the 7th of June 2018, for which notice will be given in accordance with Section 62 of the Greater London Authority Act 1999 in due course, and to invite Philip Colvin QC, former chair of the Nighttime Commission, to attend the meeting from 10 a.m. to answer questions in relation to London's nighttime economy. Great. Thank you. Would you please agree the recommendation set out in the report in relation to delegation of authority, the chair of the Assembly, that in relation to urgent matters only, a general delegation of authority in respect of the Assembly's powers and functions, apart from those that cannot under the Greater London Authority Act 1999 be delegated, be given to the Chair of the Assembly in consultation with the Deputy Chairman, party group leaders and relevant committee chairs from the close of this meeting until the next scheduled meeting of the Assembly, which will be the annual meeting on the 10th of May 2018. Thank you. Will you please note, therefore, that the next scheduled meeting of the Assembly will indeed be the annual meeting, which will take place at 10 o'clock on the 10th of May in the Chamber here at City Hall.
Noted.
Right. Can I now deal with other business? There's no urgent business. However, I want to remind you that the inaugural meeting of the Assembly's Fire, Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee will take place here in the Chamber at the rise of this question time. There will also be a members' briefing in Committee Room 3 from Age UK. And finally, on behalf of the Assembly, I'd like to take this opportunity to put on record our thanks to Jeff Jacobs, the outgoing head of paid service.
Well done, Jeff.
Jeff has been at the GLA for 13 years, 6 of those as head of paid service, and he has supported all 3 mayors and the Assembly members elected since 2000. Did you want to comment on that? No, you didn't.
Small supplementary, but
yes. Okay. I would also like the Assembly, please, to put on record our thanks to Katie Smith, Head of Scrutiny. Katie joined the Assembly 5 years ago, during which time she has led the Assembly through some very challenging and high-profile pieces of scrutiny, including our response to the Garden Bridge and most recently in response to the Grenfell fire. We wish them both all the very best with their future endeavours. Could I invite them both to the chamber floor to accept a small token of our appreciation? Jolly well hope they're here. Where are they?
There's Jeffrey over there.
there's Jeff.
Did you say
Yeah.
And before I bang the gavel, I'm sure you'd like to join me in thanking the security staff to dealing with our little bit of local difficulty which we had earlier. Thank you so much.
Very quick, this quick meeting. Get